Chapter 8:13. Safe Journey, Your Highness. Safe Journey, Your Highness. Although Imperial Consort Chui could leave the palace to reunite with her family on her birthday, she could not spend the night outside the palace. She had to return to the palace before the palace gates closed. At this time, the banquet at the Chui residence had not ended. Seeing the Chui family escorting Imperial Consort Chui out, all the officials and nobles present rose to send Imperial Consort Chui back to the palace. After that, the people who came to the Chui residence for the banquet also began to leave. After almost all the guests had left, Yu Dingfeng, the Marquis of Ningyuan, sighed in front of the Chui residence and said, "Her Highness is extremely dissatisfied with what we have done in the past year. If the situation continues to develop like this, the foundation that we have painstakingly built in the court over the past decades will be completely destroyed." Chui Qingze, the master of the Chui family, cupped his hands and said, "The success or failure of the academy depends on the Yu family. Brother Chui, rest assured, everything is under control." Yu Dingfeng smiled and returned the greeting before saying, "It's getting late. Brother Chui, I will also take my leave." Beside him, Chen Qing also raised his head. "We are also leaving." Chui Qingze smiled and said, "Second brother, please see the two lords Chen off." A man behind Chui Qingze stepped forward and looked at Chen Chong and his brother. He smiled and said, "Lords, please. The Yu family cannot be underestimated in the future." On the carriage returning to the residence, Chen Qing, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. They were all of the King of Shu's faction. Chui Qingze had just asked Second Master Chui to see them off while he himself sent Yu Dingfeng off. This subtle difference was a very clear signal to them. Chen Chong, who had his eyes closed, suddenly opened them and said lightly, "The Yu family cannot be saved." "What?" Chen Qing frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" Chen Chong looked back and asked, "Big brother, who do you think the Emingzu Academy belongs to?" The academy was named after the eldest princess. From its establishment to its operation, everything was handled by the eldest princess. As Chen Qing spoke, his voice gradually became softer. He looked at Chen Chong and asked, "You mean the Marquis of Chang'an County Li Yi?" Although outsiders knew that the Emingzu Academy was established by the Princess Royal Highness for the poor, the conversation between the Princess Royal Highness and the Marquis of Chang'an County in the Imperial Garden that day was known by almost everyone in the court. They all knew that the matter of the academy, although it was in the name of the Princess Royal Highness, the things behind the scenes were all done by the Marquis of County Li. Chen Qing frowned. "Even if it's him, it might not be. Has Big Brother ever seen him lose?" Chen Qing's voice stopped abruptly. After a moment of silence he asked, "Is this the only reason? Isn't this reason enough?" Chen Chong looked at him and shook his head. Ever since the Princess Royal Highness visited the Yu family and was rejected several times, the Princess Royal residence would send people to the Yu family every day to discuss. In the beginning, they would stay for a day, half a day, 4 hours, and an hour. Later, they would only stay in front of the Yu residence for less than a quarter of an hour. What can this mean? Sang Shichen said that this means that the Yu family is about to be finished. Assistant Minister Tsang? Chen Qing was startled and his expression changed slightly. Assistant Minister Tsang is a meticulous person and rarely makes mistakes in the matters he has handled. If this is really the case, I'm afraid I have to warn you, Dingfeng. If this spoils the lady's plans. Turn. He lifted the curtain with one hand. Before he could finish the word, "turn around," another hand reached out from the side and closed the curtain again. Chen Qing turned to look at him and said in surprise, "Second brother, you are..." Chen Chong did not speak and leaned back against the carriage. Chen Qing just looked at him like this. Some thought surged in his mind and his expression gradually changed. What? Last night at the Chui family, County Magistrate Lu really did that? When he heard this news from Fong, even Li Yi himself was a little surprised. He didn't know much about County Magistrate Lu, but he knew how daring he was. After knowing him for so long, Li Yi felt that it was impossible for him to be wrong. He actually dared to verbally humiliate the Chui family's third young master at Imperial Consort Chui's birthday banquet in front of so many officials and nobles. No matter how he looked at it, this didn't seem like something that County Magistrate Lu would do. That's right, I also find it strange. Fong also said with a surprised expression, "This old Lu usually looks very timid. I didn't expect him to be so hot-blooded. Perhaps Lord Lu is not in a good mood." It's understandable. Understandable. No matter what. He was still a fifth-rank official of the imperial court and a talent that Her Highness the Empress valued. As long as he didn't directly contradict imperial consort Cui and play around with the younger generation of the Cui family, no one could do anything to him. However, what Li Yi couldn't understand was that even if he wanted to draw a clear line with the Cui family and the King of Shu, why did he choose this time? Moreover, with his cautious character, how could he do things without leaving any room for retreat? I also don't understand why Lord Lu is so anxious to draw a clear line with the Cui family or the King of Shu. Even if he really wants to show his loyalty to County Marquis Li, he doesn't have to do this. In a secluded room of a tea house in Willow Lane, Zhang Shichen shook his head with some doubts on his face. There are rumors outside that this person was instructed by Li Yi to do that last night. Chen Chong took a sip of tea and asked, "How do you know that he wants to draw a clear line with the Cui family?" Zhang Shichen put down the teacup and said, "Although I don't know why he is so anxious, Lu Dayou is a smooth and slick person. He is also extremely cautious. If there is no reason, he wouldn't do such a reckless thing. Especially his behavior last night, it seems that he deliberately put on a show for others to see." Cautious? Chen Chong laughed coldly and said, "He is the bravest and most arrogant Jingdo magistrate in history. Many playboys in the capital have suffered at his hands. You say that he is cautious? The Chen family should know very well how difficult the position of Jingdo magistrate is." Zhang Shichen glanced at him and said, "But this Lord Lu has done many arrogant things and offended many people. But his position is becoming more and more stable, and there is even a faint trend of him moving up. Lord Chen thinks that he is just relying on luck. But after what happened last night, I can no longer see through this person." "Even you can't see through him?" Chen Chong started and said, "Dong Wenyun Lu Yi, and now even this Lu Dayou. What kind of people come out from Qing'an Prefecture? This person is acting so strangely. Something must have happened. However, we are not on his side, so it is not good to ask." He glanced down and said, "Third mistress has come out. Official Chen should leave." Chen Chong stood up and raised his hands. "Official Zhang is going down anyway. Let's go together." Cut ties? In a private room in a brothel somewhere in the capital, a middle-aged man sat there. His eyes narrowed slightly as he muttered, "Just what has happened?" "This person Lu Dayou?" the man beside him asked in confusion. "Fifth master, what did you say?" The middle-aged man withdrew his gaze. His eyes seemed to drift as he looked at the man and asked, "Wu Er, how long have you been by my side?" "Yes." The man named Wu Er scratched his head and counted with his fingers. "Yes. It's been a long time." "So it has been that long." The middle-aged man stretched his body and said, "Go downstairs and buy some preserved fruits from Fuji." After the man left, the middle-aged man reclined on the couch and looked down at the stage. He muttered, "You family, who will be next?" Chapter 8:14. Yusan didn't have a name, or rather, his name was Yusan. He was sold to the Yu residence as a servant at a young age. At first, he only did odd jobs such as cleaning buckets and pouring night incense. Later, because he was quick-witted, he caught the eye of a steward and was allowed to leave the residence. He became a shop assistant in the family's shop and his days were much more comfortable than before. A few days ago, due to his outstanding performance, he was promoted from a shop assistant to the shopkeeper of the shop. It could be said that he stood at the highest point of his life. The Yu family had been in the paper shop business for decades. The paper produced by the family could be used to supply the imperial court and the common people. It was quite popular throughout the Jing kingdom. Therefore, the Yu family's shop in the capital was usually filled with customers. Most of the time, he was busy from morning to night. Yusan looked up and saw someone walking in. He immediately walked out and said with a smile, "Shopkeeper Ma, business has been good recently. I just ordered a batch yesterday and you're here to order again today?" Shopkeeper Ma was in the picture book business and had always used the Yu family's paper. Occasionally, they would give him a few wonderful picture books to comfort him on lonely nights. Shopkeeper Ma revealed an awkward expression and said, "To tell you the truth, I'm here today to return the goods." "Return goods?" Yusen looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is there something wrong with the quality of the goods?" "Shopkeeper Ma, don't worry. If that's the case, we can still exchange the goods after we verify it." "No, it's..." Shopkeeper Ma looked awkward and stammered for a while before saying, "There are a few new paper shops in the city. The quality of the paper is of high quality and the price is less than 10% of the same quality here. That's why I'm here today." Businessmen weren't fools. If they could buy better quality goods at a lower price, there was no need to think about what to choose. New paper shops? Yu-san was startled at first, thinking that it was a malicious scheme by one of his competitors. But before he could question it, footsteps came from outside the door again. A moment later, Yu-san looked at the people standing in front of him with a vigilant expression. "Are you all here to return the goods?" Just as Yu-san rushed out of the shop and ran madly toward the Yu family, Yu Dingfeng's expression changed drastically in the Yu mansion. "What did you say?" The Yu family's patriarch, who was discussing important matters with someone from the Cui family, suddenly stood up and grabbed the servant's collar, asking, "You mean, there's someone selling paper outside that's of better quality than the Yu family's, and the price is less than a tenth of ours?" The servant's voice trembled, reporting to patriarch, "There are several shops in the capital that have returned goods and there are a long queue." Yu Dingfeng let go of his collar and forced himself to calm down. He asked, "Have you found out who the people behind these shops are? And what kind of paper is that?" If this was just a competitor's malicious suppression, then it would be fine. However, he knew better than anyone how high the cost of papermaking was. The higher the quality, the higher the cost. If he sold it at a low price, he wouldn't even be able to recoup the cost. Naturally, it wouldn't last long. If it was just a malicious suppression by a competitor, it would be fine. He knew better than anyone else how high the cost of making paper was. The higher the quality, the higher the cost. If they sold it at a low price, they wouldn't be able to recover the cost. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to last long. What's more, in order to let the academy buy more paper at a high price so that they could profit from it, the Yu family had invested all their money and hoarded a large amount of goods. If, and only if, there was a cheap and high-quality paper on the market, causing no one to be willing to buy the Yu family's paper, then the Yu family would really be at the end of their rope. "I can't find out their background." The servant looked at Yu Dingfeng and whispered, "I've sent someone to check the quality of the paper. It's indeed of high quality and has never appeared on the market before." Before the servant finished speaking, the voice of the man surnamed Cui came over. Brother Yu, what's wrong with you? Brother Yu, wake up." After Yu Dingfeng's philtrum was pinched by the man surnamed Cui, he slowly regained consciousness. Only then did he feel a chill on his back. His countenance was even paler. "Go, send someone to the princess mansion," he said. No, prepare the carriage, quickly prepare the carriage, I will go personally." Although the eldest princess had always lived deep in the palace, the princes and princesses could open a mansion outside the palace after they came of age. This time, the academy's supply of paper had always been communicated with the Yu family by the people of the princess's mansion. Yu Dingfeng urged the coachman all the way. He didn't care if the imperial censor would see him driving the carriage around in the capital. He hurriedly got off the carriage when they arrived in front of the princess's mansion. After being brought into the princess's mansion, he waited in a side hall. He was nervous. He didn't know how many times he had brewed a cup of tea. He didn't see a female official slowly walk in until it was tasteless. Yu Dingfeng hurriedly got up and said directly, "I'm here today to supply paper to the academy." The female official looked at him and smiled. "There are a few new paper shops in the capital. Do you know about them?" Yu Dingfeng's legs went soft and he fell heavily back on the chair. How could this be? Chen Qing paced in the hall, occasionally glancing at Chen Chong who was sitting there drinking tea. He said, "It's only been a few days since that night." In other words, before that, someone had already been plotting against the Yu family? Isn't this normal? Chen Chong looked up at him and asked, "What did the Cui family say?" Cui Qingze flipped the table on the spot. "This is no longer just a matter of not stopping the establishment of the academy." Chen Qing said irritably, "This time, the Yu family has done their best to bring down the eldest princess. And it is because of this that there will be no more Yu family in the future." Chen Chong shook his head and said, "Yu Dingfeng is too greedy." After the incident with the foreign merchants, the Cui family was greatly weakened. Now that there is no more Yu family, it is like the Cui family has lost an arm. And this arm was deliberately cut off. Someone purposely cut it off? Chen Qing's brows furrowed. He was suddenly shocked and asked, "You mean he has already begun to plot?" Impossible. He only has a personal grudge with the king of Shu. He has never been close to any of the princes. Prince Jin is too young, and His Majesty has so many princes who have grown up. It can't be Prince Jin. This doesn't make sense, and it is not in accordance with the law. The only person he is close to is the eldest princess. Could it be that he wants to help the eldest princess ascend the throne? This is naturally impossible. Chen Chong shook his head and said, "But I feel that this is only the beginning. Let's just wait and see." He stood up and looked at Chen Qing. He said slowly, "Perhaps it is time for our Chen family to consider this carefully." At the Qin family banquet, Qin Yan sighed and said, "This time, the Yu family completely has no chance of making a comeback. After this, the large clans that rely on the paper market will at least be greatly weakened. If they stake everything on one throw like the Yu family, even the entire clan will be implicated." He said a few words and saw Qin He, who was playing with a 7-year-old urchin. Qin Yan couldn't help but frown and say, "Old Fifth, can you not fool around like this? Can't you do something serious?" "Ah, Fifth uncle is an elder. You should respect your elders and not fight with me." The fifth master of the Qin family was playing with the child of Qin Yan's concubine. When he heard this, he raised his head and had a stunned expression. "Big brother, I'm doing something serious every day. Watching a play and listening to music, this is what you mean by serious business?" Fifth Master Qin was at a loss. Could it be that this doesn't count? Everything is being arranged according to what you said. In the future, the price of paper will definitely plummet. The situation like the Yu family, where one family dominates the market, will no longer appear. Of course, even if it does, it will be us dominating the market. As Li Xian spoke lazily, he suddenly thought of something. He sat up and asked in confusion, "Now, can you tell me what the second type of paper is used for?" Chapter 8:15. Wipe my butt. This somewhat vulgar, or even vulgar, answer clearly did not satisfy Li Xian. Using paper to do such a thing was no longer just a matter of disgracing the culture. He still felt that this kind of paper had some use that he did not know. Li Yi shook his head. "You see, you asked me and I told you, but you didn't believe me. Forget it, I will know one day." Li Xian gave up asking, curled his lips, and turned to leave. When he stepped out of the door, he stopped and thought for a moment, but a strange expression appeared on his face. Maybe it seems that it really works? In the courtyard, Li Yi opened an envelope and took out a few pieces of paper. This was the news that had just been sent by the nets above, snares below. So much money had been invested, and it had not only made a splash, but also had a stable source of news from the court to the martial arts world. Today's news was all about the Yu family. This time, the Yu family had used almost all of their power to drag down the academy. However, they had not expected that once the improved paper was released, the secret recipe that the Yu family treasured as much as their lives would become worthless. From then on, their paper mill business would no longer be able to continue. They could not sell the large amount of paper they had stockpiled, and the additional equipment, manpower, and material resources were almost all wasted. They might even owe a lot of debts. However, if they sold the improved paper at a price lower than the improved paper, it was estimated that they would only lose about 90% of their profits. They could still recover some of the cost, which was enough for the Yu family to survive this difficult winter. The closure of the largest paper mill in the Jing Kingdom, the Yu family, proved one thing. Business was risky, and one had to be cautious. No matter how rich a family was, it could go bankrupt overnight. The Cui family was like this, and so was the Yu family. The Li family had much more business outside than these two families, so they must learn a lesson and do their business in a down-to-earth manner. They must not be too arrogant, and they must not forget their original intentions to succeed. The old emperor said that the Yu family had made some contributions to the empire in the past. In this time of crisis, if it was convenient for them to lend a helping hand, it would be better for them to do so. Out of the spirit of humanitarianism, he would have Her Royal Highness send someone to buy the paper that the Yu family couldn't sell at 10% of the price of the improved paper. This way, at least for this winter, they wouldn't have to worry about starving or freezing to death. Brother Cui, save the Yu family. You must save the Yu family this time. In just 2 days, Yu Dingfeng, the head of the Yu family, had a face full of stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. Cui Qingze had lost count of how many times he had been pestered by Yu Dingfeng in the past 2 days. With an impatient expression on his face, he said, "That kind of improved paper is indeed of a much higher quality than the Yu family's paper. Moreover, it's so cheap. Everyone in the world can see that. What can I do? As long as I can obtain that modification method." "You still want the improvement method?" Cui Qingze waved his sleeves and said, "Do you know who is behind those paper shops? The Crown Prince of Ning, Her Royal Highness, the Wang family. When you rejected the eldest princess 3 times, you should have expected that this day would come. Not to mention my Cui family. Even Her Highness can't interfere in this matter. From now on, the development of the entire paper industry in the Jing Kingdom will be turned upside down." Yu Dingfeng sat back in his chair in a daze, the last trace of blood draining from his face. This time, what the Yu family lost was not only the shining silver, but also the foundation of the Yu family in the Jing Kingdom. Once the improved paper was released, who would be willing to buy the Yu family's paper? In the future, the Yu family would only be left with Ning Yuanho's estate. Without credit, even if His Royal Highness King of Shu ascended to the throne in the future, the Yu family would have no value. What kind of generous reward could they get? Yu family, Yu family. From today onwards, there would be no Yu family. The Yu family has some foundation. After this incident, they won't completely fall. However, without the famous paper shops in the Jing Kingdom, and without anyone in the court, the decline is only a matter of time. They want to obstruct the development of the academy for their own interests, so there is nothing to be pitiful about. With a single thought, she could decide the major events of the country. After a long time, Her Royal Highness also developed some temperament or momentum that she didn't have before. A centipede dies, but it doesn't fall down. Although the power of the King of Shu is not as strong as before, his prestige and influence are still there. But there is no hurry. If one Yu family falls, thousands of Yu families will fall too. There is still a lot of time. No hurry. The two were very clear about where the biggest obstacle in their plan was. Of course, the difficulties in the future might be greater, but before that, they had to clear these obstacles one by one. Sitting on the grassy slope behind the School of Mathematics, Emingzu crossed her knees and said, "The establishment of the academy is enough to shake the foundations of the aristocratic families. Therefore, these days, the rich and powerful families all over the country have reacted fiercely. Unlike before, they were always a mass of loose sand. Now, they have united and formed a force that can't be ignored. If we don't appease or deal with them, I'm afraid there will be a lot of trouble." Li Yi lay on the lawn, folded his arms, and put them behind his head. He said lazily, "You have already shaken their foundations, and you still don't allow them to resist. Is there still any law in this world?" "Law." Emingzu glanced at him and said, "I am the law. What about me?" Li Yi closed his eyes and twitched the corner of his mouth. He said, "Everyone is looking for their own interests. If I were one of those big families, I'm afraid I wouldn't quietly wait for my family's foundations to be shaken by you." Emingzu tilted her head to look at him and asked, "Which side are you on?" "Of course I." Li Yi opened his eyes and moved his body to the side to lean against her. He said, "I'm on your side." Smelling the faint fragrance coming from the side, Li Yi closed his eyes again and said, "Since we are united for the sake of profit, we can naturally become scattered again for the sake of profit. Actually, I have already told you about the solution to this matter before." Listening to his words, a strange expression gradually appeared on Her Royal Highness' face. This matter had been bothering her for a long time. Now that she heard his words, she realized that this matter could actually be solved in this way. As long as those big families are no longer united and even suspicious of each other, then they can be divided and defeated one by one. This shouldn't be difficult for you. After Li Yi finished speaking, there was no sound coming from beside him for a long time. He opened his eyes and saw that the eldest princess was looking at him with a strange expression. He had never seen this kind of expression before. He looked at her with a bit of vigilance and asked, "What are you thinking about?" They have discussed this matter for many days and still haven't come up with a solution. Her Royal Highness looked at him and said, "I'm thinking if you stay in the palace in the future and give me advice, won't I be able to save a lot of trouble?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "External officials can't stay in the palace for a long time. You'd better not think about it." Emingzu looked at him thoughtfully and pretended to be thinking seriously. She said, "External officials can't, but internal officials can." External officials referred to the civil and military officials in the court. Internal officials naturally referred to the officials in the palace, such as the eunuchs who passed edicts and the eunuchs who lived in the palace. Wife? Li Yi suddenly climbed up from the grass and turned pale with fright. You want to make me empress? Chapter 8:16. Empress. Emingzu was stunned at first. She didn't understand what he meant, but then she understood. She glanced at him again and said, I think that Chief Chang's position is more suitable for you. How shameless. How long had she been an empress? She might not have learned anything else, but she learned the cold-bloodedness and ruthlessness of an emperor faster than anyone else. She didn't even look at who was the one who had been racking her brains, working day and night. It was fine if she didn't give her the title of empress, but for her own selfish desires, she actually wanted her to be a eunuch? Putting others aside, what would old man Chong think? He had worked hard all his life, but in the end, he didn't even have the position of Chief Chong. The emperor was heartless, the emperor was heartless. The proud Lolita ran over from the front and asked, Sir, what happened to Her Majesty? Her Majesty is fine. Li Yi shook his head and asked, The class hasn't ended yet. Why did you run over? I've already learned the things taught in class. I saw Sir and Royal Sister here, so I ran over. The proud Lolita looked at Li Yi and asked, Sir, when is Sister going to have a baby? Sister? Li Yi looked at Emingzu. Not Royal Sister. The proud Lolita shook his arm and said, It's Sister Rui. Li Yi pinched her face and said, You have to call her mistress. The proud Lolita pouted stubbornly and said, It's Sister Rui. Up to you, up to you. Li Yi waved his hand and said, There's less than 2 months left. Why are you asking? I'm just asking. The proud Lolita raised her head and calculated. Then she said with a smile, Sir, continue talking to Royal Sister. I'm going to play. They were friends, and he had done so much for her behind her back. In the end, she was not even conferred the title of Empress. What else was there to say? Li Yi sat up on the lawn and said, Wait a moment, I'm leaving too. Okay. The Tsundra Lolita held Li Yi's hand and asked, Imperial Father said that we're going to eat barbecue in Furong Garden today. Is that true? A girl's mind was really hard to guess. A few days ago, she was still wearing a white palace dress, looking delicate and reserved, but today, she had returned to her original self. Li Yi sighed, nodded and said, Yes, but it will be in the afternoon. Let's go fishing first and roast it later. I'll go get the fishing rod. The Tsundra Lolita nodded excitedly and quickly ran towards a row of houses in front of the academy. As the most tyrannical princess in the imperial palace, she naturally snatched a room that she fancied. Although she didn't usually live there, it was convenient to use it to store things. Ever since His Majesty had suspended court and let the eldest princess act as his representative, most of the officials in court found it difficult to see His Majesty, who spent his days cultivating in Furong Garden. However, although the court was temporarily suspended, it didn't mean that the emperor didn't care about state affairs at all. Some of the important officials in court had to report to Furong Garden every few days. If there was a major incident, they had to report it in person. A carriage came from afar and stopped at the gate of Furong Garden. Zhang Shichen got off the carriage and walked forward a few steps. He cupped his hands to the imperial guard at the gate and said, Assistant Minister of Revenue, Zhang Shichen, specially reports to His Majesty on the flood of the 2 provinces and the situation of the court's disaster relief silver. Please help me report this. The imperial guard cupped his hands and said, His Majesty is busy. Official Zhang, please come in and wait for a moment. Zhang Shichen was brought into a garden by the imperial guard. He looked up and saw a person in front of him. After a slight pause, he cupped his hands and said, Official Chen is also here today. Assistant Minister Tseng and Minister of the Imperial Affairs, please wait here for a moment. I will go report to His Majesty. The Imperial Guard said this and turned to leave. Zhang Shichen walked over. It's Official Chen's turn to report today? Chen Chong glanced at him. Why are you here? Did something big happen in the Ministry of Revenue? I'm just reporting to His Majesty about the disaster relief silver. The two of them chatted in the small garden. On the other side, Li Yi's grill was almost ready. He looked back and asked, Your Majesty, is your fish ready? If not, please hurry up. It will take some time to marinate it. The old emperor didn't know why he insisted on killing the fish himself. In the end, after working for a long time, he still hadn't caught the fish that the proud Lolita had caught. He couldn't afford to waste time. If he had known earlier, he would have asked her to put the fish in the small tank at the side. Back in the day, we also personally went into battle to kill enemies. Who would have thought that today, we actually couldn't do anything to a mere fish? Emperor Jing panted slightly as he lay on the rocking chair and said, "Changde, come here." As soon as he finished speaking, Changde had already bent his fingers into claws. He only felt his hand shake, and the fish appeared in Changde's hand. Emperor Jing said with some envy, "You old man, the older you get, the more powerful you are." An imperial guard came forward and reported, "Reporting to your majesty, Minister Chen and Assistant Minister Zhang of the Ministry of Revenue are waiting outside. Let them come in." Emperor Jing waved his hand. As if thinking of something, he added, "Changde, bring them here personally." After Changde left, he looked around. Li Yi was setting up the grill while Yongning was passing bricks and tiles. On the other side, Shaoning was directing Prince Jean to skewer the meat and vegetables on bamboo sticks. For the time being, no one was paying attention to this side. He quietly got up from the rocking chair and walked to the stone table on the other side. He picked up the wine pot and carefully poured a cup. Just as he brought it to his mouth, a thunderous voice suddenly exploded in his ears. "Shut up!" Emperor Jing's heart trembled, and the wine cup in his hand almost fell. Li Yi walked over with his eyes wide open and grabbed the wine cup from his hand. Emperor Jing glanced at him and explained, "This is grape wine." "Grape wine is also wine. Jeanne will just take a sip," Li Yi said resolutely. "Your Majesty, you don't know your own body. Even if it is just a cup of wine, it may cause the disease." "A small sip, really just a small sip. I have not drunk wine for more than a year." "Not even a sip." Li Yi waved to the back and said, "Shaoning, come over and take the wine pot away." The proud Lolita knew that her father could not drink, so no matter how Emperor Jing looked at her, she held the wine pot tightly and did not let go. There was no hope of breaking through from his daughter. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said angrily, "Marquis of Chong and County Li Yi, Jeanne orders you to hand over that bottle of grape wine." Li Yi looked at him and said lightly, "If your Majesty insists on doing this, then don't blame me for disrespecting the imperial decree." The two looked at each other and neither retreated. A little further away, Zhang Shichen and Chen Chong stood there in a daze, not daring to breathe. Forget it, forget it. If you don't want to drink, then don't drink. Jeanne has drunk all kinds of wine. Isn't it just a cup of grape wine? Jeanne doesn't care." After a while, Emperor Jing reluctantly looked at the grape wine in Shaoning's arms and lay back on the rocking chair. He pointed to Chen Chong and Zhang Shichen standing there and said, "You two, come over and talk." Zhang Shichen glanced at the busy Li Yi out of the corner of his eye and walked over. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, this is the information that the Ministry of Revenue has compiled about the use of the disaster relief silver. Please have a look." When Zhang Shichen spoke, Chen Chong, who was standing quietly to the side, tilted his head slightly and looked in that direction. The scene just now still remained in his mind. At this moment, a certain thought in his heart wavered again. Chapter 8:17. Lord Chen, Lord Zhang, aren't you going to have a skewer? Li Yi held 2 skewers of chicken wings in his hand and waved his hand when Chen Chong and Zhang Shichen walked past him. How could I trouble County Marquis Li to cook personally? Please excuse me. Even though they had swallowed a lot of saliva because of the smell of meat when they were reporting to His Majesty, Zhang Shichen and Chen Chong still cupped their fists in fear and left quickly. What a joke! His Majesty had just asked for a skewer of chicken wings and was refused by him. What would His Majesty think if the two of them dared to reach out now? Hypocrites! Li Yi glanced at the two who were running away. What did they mean by, "I wouldn't dare to trouble you"? They made it sound as if they had never troubled you before. One sat in front of him, another sat in front of the old emperor. I won't give it to them. Come, one for each of you. Completely ignoring the old emperor's gaze in the distance, Li Yi gave 2 skewers of chicken wings to Yongning and the proud Lolita. Thank you, sir. The Tsundra Lolita said reservedly and kissed him lightly on the cheek. Li Yi had already put the other 2 skewers on the fire. Seeing this, he turned his head to the side and said, Hey, I just ate something and my mouth is full of oil. Let me wipe it for you." The proud Lolita took out a small handkerchief and ran over to wipe it. Then she quickly ran back. Humph! Emperor Jing, who was lying on the rocking chair, made a strong nasal sound. Then he turned his head, peeled a grape and threw it into his mouth. He murmured, "Strange, really strange." "Why is it strange, Your Majesty?" Chongda lowered his head and asked. Emperor Jing was surprised and said, "Chen Chong is capable, but he usually stands firmly on the side of the king of Shu and the Cui family. When it comes to matters that are disadvantageous to them, he always avoids the important and focuses on the trivial. What is going on today? The aristocratic families are causing trouble everywhere, and I am afraid that the Cui family is adding fuel to the fire. Today, he is unexpectedly so fair and impartial, without the slightest bit of bias. As an important official of the imperial court, it is my duty to uphold justice and not be biased." "Why does Your Majesty say this?" Emperor Jing snorted coldly and said, "I'm afraid that most people in the imperial court do not think as clearly as you." After peeling another grape he said, "Speaking of which, these aristocratic clans have joined forces to rebel this time. The establishment of the academy has encountered great local obstacles. The capital is too far away, so the government decrees have been weakened. Go and call Li Yi over." Li Yi handed over the responsibility of barbecuing to Li Han. He then washed his hands and walked over. Seeing that Jing Emperor was eating grapes one by one, he nodded and said, "Grape wine and grape, there is only a difference of one word, but there is not much difference. Your Majesty should not drink wine, so it is good to eat more grapes." After he finished speaking, he reached out and took the grapes that Jing Di threw over. Needless to say, these tribute grapes were indeed much sweeter than those outside. Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, "The aristocratic families are now united. You want Mingzhu to edit the clan records. According to this method, the status of all the old aristocratic families will be different. Won't it cause a greater backlash?" "I did not say all of them." Li Yi ate another grape and said, "For example, the Zhang family of Pingyang, the Wei family of Yunzhou, the Go family of Tongzhou," he named a few names. "These are all good and innocent families. Of course, they should be treated differently. The Zhang family of Pingyang, the Wei family of Yunzhou, the Go family of Tongzhou." Jing Di frowned and asked, "Where are these people?" Before he finished speaking, he closed his mouth again. His face showed a thoughtful expression. After a moment he nodded and said, "Yes, these are all good and innocent families. The imperial court must give them special preferential treatment. Even if no one in their family is an official in the imperial court, their position in the clan records must be slightly raised. Go and continue with your work. Leave 2 strings of wings for me." Jing Di waved his hand and turned back to order. "Come, squeeze these grapes into juice for me." Outside Hibiscus Garden, Chen Chong and Sang Shichen did not separate but got on the same carriage. Chen Chong frowned and said, "Your Majesty just said that you want to recompile the clan records. I don't know what kind of storm it will cause." Sang Shichen shook his head. "This is no small matter. Once the clan records is recompiled, in the future, the selection of officials in the imperial court, the marriages between the aristocratic families, and the prestige of the aristocratic families among the people will all change. It can be said that it will fundamentally affect the status of the aristocratic families. It will not be easy for Your Majesty to suppress the old aristocratic families. Recently, the Cui family has been instigating in the background. Those people finally can't sit still anymore." Chen Chong looked outside and said, "Your Majesty's determination to build an academy and support the commoner families is so strong. It is reasonable to suppress them. However, in the past few decades, these old aristocratic families have become unprecedentedly united. I'm afraid that His Majesty's move won't go smoothly. Moreover, their reputation among the people is so high that it can't be destroyed by a single clan records. It's still unknown whether or not it will be recognized by the people after it is recompiled." Sang Shichen shook his head and said, "In terms of prestige, can they compare to the eldest princess? Right now, Her Highness is in charge. If she carries it out, who among the people will object?" Chen Chong was instantly speechless. In the past 2 years, the eldest princess had really done too many great things for the benefit of the country and the people. If not for this, His Majesty would not have abandoned all the princes and made her the acting regent. It was precisely because the decrees she carried out were very close to the people's lives that in terms of prestige and reputation among the people, even His Majesty could not compare to Her Highness. Because of the princess, the people who had changed the plight of their families even saw her as a living bodhisattva and had set up a longevity tablet for her in their homes. Chen Chong suddenly thought of something and asked, "Say, what do you think that Li Yi is thinking?" Zhang Shichen looked at him and asked, "What do you mean?" "You saw it just now. His imperial favor is unprecedented. What relationship does he have with His Majesty?" Deep confusion appeared on Chen Chong's face. With his ability and influence, no matter which prince he chooses to support, the chances of the King of Shu ascending to the throne are extremely slim. However, he did not agree to any of the prince's solicitations. Instead, he has always supported Her Highness the eldest princess? Seeing Chen Chong nod, Zhang Shichen thought for a moment, then said, "Perhaps he himself has realized that no matter what position he holds in His Majesty's heart, if he participates in the struggle for the throne, he will definitely incur His Majesty's displeasure. Through this method, he is expressing his attitude and stance." Chen Chong frowned. "You mean to say that by not helping either side, he is indirectly expressing to His Majesty that he will not participate in the struggle for the throne?" "What else?" Zhang Shichen looked at him and asked, "Does Lord Chen think that he wants to support an empress?" "This, of course not." Chen Chong shook his head. However, compared to the last time he had answered this question, he hesitated for a moment longer. Absurd, absurd. The clan records uses genealogical traditions to determine the ranks of the clans. How can it be so easily changed? "Duke Zhang, don't be agitated, don't be agitated." A middle-aged man supported the furious elder and said, "The court's actions have disregarded etiquette and subverted tradition. It will definitely not be recognized by the world. Duke Zhang, don't worry." The elder looked at him and said disdainfully, "Of course you don't have to worry. Your Zhang clan still has people who are officials in the court. Even if they have really been demoted, it won't be much. My Pingyang Zhang clan has been demoted by 2 whole ranks." Hearing this, the middle-aged man thought for a moment and said no more. This elder of the Pingyang Zhang clan was right. The Zheng clan was not like the Zhang family. The Zhang clan still had people who were officials in the court. Even if the clan records were rearranged, the position of the Zheng clan would not change too much. As for the Zhang family that had no one in the court, who cared? Preposterous, preposterous. If this is the case, how can there be any etiquette? Another person angrily slammed the table. The person beside him also had a gloomy expression. The division of clans has existed since ancient times. How can it be changed so easily? Like the Pingyang Zhang clan, the Wei clan of Yunzhou and the Go clan of Tongzhou were also the 2 clans that had suffered the most in the editing of the clan records. After Wei Feng and Go Su finished speaking, the hall became even more rowdy. However, it was impossible to know what everyone was thinking in their hearts. Although there were many clans like the Zhang clan, the Wei clan, and the Go clan that had suffered in this incident, there were also some clans that, due to various reasons, not only did their status not suffer, they even improved. In the future, their prestige and fame would probably be even greater. This was a good thing. After expressing deep sympathy for the Zhang clan, the Wei clan, and the other clans, when they returned to their clans, they still had to celebrate. Chapter 818. The matter of revising the clan records had been announced for a long time. Naturally, it wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time if they wanted to rearrange all the noble clans of the Jing kingdom. However, the revision this time was not to completely overturn the original rankings. Instead, it was to make some changes to the original foundation. The grand scholars from the Ministry of Rites and the Hongwen Library were overseeing the revision. Within half a month, they had almost completed it. A person hurried in from outside and placed a booklet on the table. He said, "This is the first draft that I brought from the Ministry of Rites. Everyone, take a look at it as soon as possible. You must return it by today. I want to see how they will rank the clan records." The old man surnamed Zhang snorted coldly and picked up the booklet. If the Pingyang Zhang clan were to follow the rankings announced to the public, they would be demoted by 2 ranks. This would be a great humiliation to the entire clan. In the future, how would the name of the Pingyang Zhang clan be trusted by others? However, when he picked up the booklet and flipped through it, his beard trembled, and he put it down again. "I still have some matters to attend to today. I'll take my leave first." Seeing the old man surnamed Zhang put down the booklet and immediately turn to leave, the crowd was not surprised at all. The Pingyang Zhang clan had suffered a heavy loss this time. After seeing the results, they were already extremely angry and did not want to stay here any longer. Let me see. Wei Fong and Go Su, who were the closest to the booklet, went over and flipped through 2 pages with sullen expressions. After seeing their clan's name, they looked at each other and were stunned. The representative of the Yunzhou Wei clan closed the booklet, pursed his lips and coughed lightly. I suddenly remembered that I have some matters to attend to at home. I'll take my leave first. The man named Go Su, who represented the Tongzhou Go clan, chased after him. Brother Wei, don't worry. I'll go with you. Someone flipped through the booklet doubtfully and murmured, "What's wrong with these 3 people? Even if they're really ranked at the bottom, aren't there so many people who have suffered the same fate as them?" Not long after the words left his mouth, he stopped abruptly. The Pingyangzhong clan, the Yunzhou Wei clan, the Tongzhou Go clan. The rankings of these 3 clans were not as low as they had expected. Instead, they were higher than the clans of most of the people present. Not only that, but the rankings of several other clans had also exceeded their expectations. What's going on? The Zhang clan, the Wei clan, and the Go clan, could it be that they've already sided with? That's impossible. Didn't you see what they looked like just now? Then how do you explain this? No one could explain it, and no one could understand why these families, who were clearly in the same situation as them, were given preferential treatment in this matter. Why did they do so? Although this ranking did not determine the rise and fall of the aristocratic families, the impact on them could not be ignored. If the new clan records was accepted by the world, would their families still be able to maintain the same respected status as before? While many people were guessing in their hearts, they also looked at some of the people around them with a bit of scrutiny. On the surface, he seemed to be on the same boat as them, but who knew what he had done behind their backs? Otherwise, why would there be such an unfair outcome? Who knew how many of them were like Madame Zhang, Madame Wei, and Madame Go, doing one thing on the surface and another behind their backs? Someone frowned and said, "Perhaps the imperial court did this on purpose?" On purpose. Someone sneered. Why did they choose them? Looking at the expressions of the people around them, they found that it was completely different from when they entered the door. As soon as the old man surnamed Zhang returned home, a man came out to greet him and asked anxiously, "Father, how did it go?" The old man surnamed Zhang glanced at him and said, "What do you mean how?" The man said anxiously, "The clan records, our Zhang family." The old man surnamed Zhang waved his hand and said, "Go and make arrangements for the big banquet in the mansion tonight. Ask them all to come back. No one is missing." The man looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Oh yes." The old man surnamed Zhang thought of something and waved his hand and said, "The land that the academy uses in Pingyang, donate it all. Donate it." The man was shocked and asked, "Father, haven't we discussed it with those people? We won't give in on this matter." "What do you know?" The old man surnamed Zhang glared at him and said, "I said I'll donate it. Don't ask anything else. Go and do your work." The old man surnamed Zhang strode away. The young man stood there in a daze for a long time before he turned around and left with a heavy heart. At the same time, in another mansion in the capital, Wei Fong, who had just returned, ordered the housekeeper, "Quick, send a letter to Yunzhou immediately. Tell them that the Wei family's ranking in the clan records has risen to the 3rd level. Tell them not to make things difficult for the people who are building the academy in the capital and to help them more. Those who disobey will be punished according to the family rules." Not far away from the Wei family, the person in charge of the Go family in the capital of Tongzhou was also ordering his subordinates. "Don't rest on the way. Go to Tongzhou overnight and tell those rich merchants to donate as much as they can. If anyone disgraces the Go family in Tongzhou, don't blame me for being impolite." Within a day, news of the same content had spread from the capital several times. The Zhang family, the Wei family. These people, what are they doing? The head of the Cui family, Cui Qing's face was gloomy. This matter can only be done if everyone is united. If someone is lax, what others do will be seen by the world. In contrast, won't they be reviled by thousands of people? Cui Qinghe, the second in command of the Cui family, shook his head and said, "It's not just a matter of the Zhang family and the Wei family. This time, the revision of the clan records, His Majesty's attitude is completely unpredictable. At this time, the final ranking has not been decided, and the big families are suspicious of each other. Some people have even taken the initiative to express goodwill to the imperial court. This time, it's our negligence. This is the simplest trick to sow discord. I don't believe that they can't see through it. Will it work? The eldest princess looked at Li Yi and asked with a frown. So what if they see through it? So what if they can't see through it? Li Yi took out a small bamboo basket from the kitchen, took out a washed apple, and handed it to Yong Ning. Xiaoning, Xiaofan, Duanwu, come and eat an apple. Xiaofan was playing with the two girls in the yard. Li Yi waved to them and gave each of them an apple. The apple sent by the Wang family had thin skin and thick flesh. It was sweet and delicious. The taste was very good. He took out the last apple from the basket and took a bite. Only then did he see the eldest princess raise her hand and hand it over. He asked in surprise, "Do you want it too?" "No." Emingzu glared at him, slightly angry in her heart. You see, the principle is the same. Xiao Huan and the others can eat the apple, but you can't, so you're unhappy. Because what they can't eat is not only the apple. Li Yi looked at her, divided the apple into two, and handed her the unbitten half. He said, so the reason is not important, the process is not important, the result is important. Emingzu took a bite of the apple and thought about it. Li Yi held the half of the apple in his hand and looked at it over and over again. He didn't find the bite mark. He raised his head and said embarrassedly, "Sorry, I gave it to the wrong person, can you?" He found that the half of the apple in her hand already had a bite mark. He waved his hand and said with some disdain, forget it, I don't want it." Chapter 8:19. Let me tell you, when it comes to apples, the Wang families are the best. Li Yi nibbled on the apple with 2 bites missing, handed over a letter, and said, the Zhang family of Pingyang, the Go family of Tongzhou, the Wei family of Yunzhou. These families have already sent back fast horses. This time, the imperial court has given them enough preferential treatment. I think they should know what to do. As for the others, there's nothing to worry about. The Zhang clan and the Wei clan have a very delicate position among the major clans. Without them, they won't be able to hold their own. If they continue to persist in going about things the wrong way, they won't be able to withstand the public opinion of the people with those clans in the lead. Li Mingzhu looked at him. After thinking for a moment, she said seriously, you really don't want to think about entering the palace? Power, wealth, glory, splendor. I can give you whatever you want. I won't consider it. Li Yi shook his head firmly. Power, wealth, glory. He had none of them now. This invitation was not sincere at all, and there was no need to consider it at all. The princess took a bite of the apple and said, I don't know what they will do next. No matter what they will do, just take it. Li Yi threw away half of the apple core, clapped his hands and said, it's good that they will do something. If they are all quiet, I don't know where to start. Whether it was the Yu family's difficulties, the chaos of the aristocratic families, or all the previous events, in most cases, it started with the other party seeking death. If he really wanted to take the initiative to design and target, it would be a waste of time and energy. It would not be as simple and convenient as it was now. However, after suffering so many losses in a row, the king of Shu was still holed up in Shuzhou, and they had also suffered a lot in the capital city or other places. Thinking about it, they should be stable for a while. Rui was about to give birth, and Li Yi did not want to trouble himself in other places. If they could let him spend the new year in peace, should he be more lenient in the coming year? The head of the Cui family, Cui Qingze, put down a letter and said, there's news from the palace. Her ladyship said that in the next few months, it's better to stay quiet and not move. We only need to pay more attention to the eldest princess. Everyone has seen the eldest princess's performance in court recently. She is even more cautious than His Majesty when it comes to handling political affairs. Someone frowned and said, besides, none of the people she transferred from the various departments are simple people. Isn't waiting for the princess to make a mistake the most inferior method? How could Cui Qingze not know that this was the most inferior method? However, the more they moved, the greater the loss. In less than a month, the Yu family was gone. The aristocratic families that had united with great difficulty also became distracted and had different thoughts because of a broken book. The eldest princess, or County Marquis Li, dealt with every move accurately and ruthlessly. How could they dare to make another move? Without absolute confidence, he didn't dare to make any rash moves. After careful calculation, he didn't dare to calculate how much power the king of Shu's faction had lost in the past 2 years. There was no fight for the throne, and there were no factions attacking each other. How could the situation become like this? After careful consideration in the past few days, he didn't have full confidence in something for the first time. In short, we need to be more stable these days. We also need to restrain the children in the family. Don't let anyone get hold of us. Cui Qingzi stood up and waved his hand in annoyance. Let's call it a day. As the head of the Cui family spoke, everyone in the hall stood up and took their leave. When walking out of the Cui mansion, Zhang Shichen paused and said, Brother Chen, are you going to Willow Lane today? Same way. Chen Chong stepped out of the gate of the Cui mansion and nodded slightly. Watching the two figures go away, someone finally couldn't help asking in confusion, when did the Zhang family and the Chen family become so close? I've never heard of any other contact between the two families. It's really strange. Everyone was puzzled, but they didn't pay too much attention to it. After all, the two families belonged to the King of Shu's faction. Even if there really was some unusual contact, it wasn't something inexplicable. It was still the tea house in Willow Lane. Zhang Shichen took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and handed it to Chen Chong. I've organized this. It's a summary of all the major and minor events that have happened in the court in the past 2 years, as well as the gains and losses of the King of Shu's faction. Brother Chen, why don't you take a look? Chen Chong glanced at him before looking at the paper in his hand. The Cui family's decades of planning in the court has been mostly destroyed in the past 2 years. The King of Shu's current advantage is that he is the eldest son of imperial concubine Cui. He only has this identity as the eldest son of the emperor. Zhang Shichen's gaze wavered. Unfortunately, everyone, including the Cui family and imperial concubine Cui, has been blinded by this identity. They seem to have forgotten that the one who ultimately decides this matter is His Majesty. His Majesty's attitude towards the King of Shu is really not the same as how he treats the eldest son of the emperor. Although His Highness's actions were too muddle-headed, he has already been sent to Shuzhou for a year. His Majesty's body is unwell, and he would rather choose the eldest princess than summon His Highness back. I really can't understand. Gains and losses. Chen Chong put down the paper, the corners of his mouth twitching. I'm afraid there are only losses and no gains? Li Yi escorted 3rd Miss Chen out of the courtyard and said, There's still about a month left. The imperial physician will take her pulse every few days. Yesterday, I invited Master Tan Yin over to take a look. Everything is fine. You don't have to worry. These days, he rarely came here, but every time he did, he would run into her. That's good. 3rd Miss Chen nodded with a smile. Seeing the figure at the entrance of the alley, she said, It's getting late. I'm going back. Seeing Chen Chong leave with her, Li Yi turned his gaze to Zhang Shichen, who was standing to the side. The last time I saw Minister Qin, he said that the Ministry of Revenue was very busy, and Her Highness had sent another person away, so he was a bit busy. Li Yi looked at him and said doubtfully, Assistant Minister Zhang seems to be in such a good mood every day. It doesn't look like he's very busy. Zhang Shichen smiled and didn't mind. He said, This time, I'm specially waiting for County Marquis Li. Waiting for me? Li Yi looked at him in surprise. Zhang Shichen looked at him and stretched out his hand to the side. He said, I wonder if County Marquis Li can come to the tea house for a chat? The Zheng family was firmly on the side of the King of Shu. Although they weren't mortal enemies, they were definitely not friends. If he had to link it to something, it would be because he ate her dumplings without paying. The dumplings made by the Marquis of Chong, and couldn't be compared with a cup of tea, right? Although the price of this cup of tea wasn't low, this tea house was opened by his family. Although it was expensive, it was only for style. As for the cost, it was not worth mentioning to others. It seemed that this Assistant Minister Zhang wasn't completely useless after all. Just as Zhang Shichen opened his mouth, he thought of another thing and said in surprise, 90, 63, 91, 34? What is this? This is her favorite number. Li Yi waved his hand and said, This is not important. Continue, what other interesting things about her when she was a child? Seeing the extremely interested expression on his face, Zhang Shichen calmed down and took a sip of tea before looking at him and slowly said, County Marquis Li is a young hero and has a great influence in the court. He is also highly regarded by His Majesty, and was given the title of Minister of Honor. Now that His Majesty is ill, The Eastern Palace can't be without a ruler for a long time. I wonder which of the princes in the court is most suitable to enter the Eastern Palace? Whether the Eastern Palace belongs to the Eastern Palace or not, what does it have to do with us? Li Yi shook his head and said, Lord Zhang, tell me about drunken Emo, about Nannan. Zhang Shichen shook his head and said, County Marquis Li, you are wrong. As an official, we should share the emperor's worries. This matter concerns the future of the country. How can you say it has nothing to do with us? This matter should be decided by His Majesty alone. As an official, you should know your place and don't say too much. His Majesty has always been wise and listens to my opinion. This matter? The King of Shu definitely has no chance. Don't waste your time. Let's talk about serious matters. What other interesting things did Nannan do when she was a child? Zhang Shichen's hand holding the teacup trembled and he didn't wipe the tea that fell on his hand. He looked up at Li Yi and asked, What do you mean by this, County Marquis Li? What do you mean by wasting your time? Li Yi knocked on the table and looked at him with a frown, saying, Lord Zhang, I came here with you to talk about serious matters. If you continue to use these messy things to change the topic, I will leave. Saying this, he picked up the cup of tea in his hand. Messy things. Zhang Shichen murmured. The appointment of the Eastern Palace was related to the rise and fall of the country. If he had said this in the court, he would have been drowned by the spittle of all the officials in the court. However, at this time, he couldn't care about this. Who could imagine that the Chui family, the prominent Chui family 2 years ago, the King of Shu who was like the sun at noon in the court, would end up like this in just 2 years? Since the King of Shu had no chance, don't waste your time. Sure enough, the things that happened in the past 2 years were not unintentional. Was this his attitude? In this case, he should have a lot of backup plans? Zhang Shichen looked solemn. Although he knew he shouldn't ask this question, he couldn't help but ask. May I ask? County Marquis Li, who do you think is more suitable to sit in the Eastern Palace? Clang! Li Yi put the teacup heavily on the table, looked at Zhang Shichen and said lightly, Lord Zhang, you are off the topic. Zhang Shichen stared at him for a long time, nodded and said, Nannan. Nannan didn't tell you these things? Li Yi glanced at him and said, How could she tell me? Since Nannan didn't tell you. Zhang Shichen smiled and said, Then I can't tell you. Pa. Li Yi slapped the table and said angrily, Surnamed Zhang, you fool me. Zhang Shichen cupped his hands and said, Thank you for doing me a favor today, County Marquis Li. Li Yi narrowed his eyes and looked at him asking, Recently, the Ministry of Revenue should have some old accounts to settle, right? Zhang Shichen didn't know why he brought up this matter, nodded and said, This matter is indeed my responsibility. Since it is Assistant Minister Zhang's responsibility, then it is easy. Li Yi nodded and said, This account has been urgently pressed by the Imperial Court. It has already been a few days, but there has been no movement at all. Assistant Minister Zhang still has the free time to drink tea here and slack off. If there is no result before tomorrow, it is not too much to hit you, the person in charge, with dozens of planks, right? Zhang Shichen smiled and said, County Marquis Li can manage the academy, but can you manage our Ministry of Revenue? Can't manage? After smiling, Li Yi didn't say anything else and directly turned to leave. Seeing the smile on Li Yi's face, Zhang Shichen finally realized something. His heart shook and he immediately said, Wait, County Marquis Li, wait. He hurried downstairs and didn't see Li Yi, but was stopped by the teahouse waiter. Customer, you haven't paid the bill. Zhang Shichen hurriedly took out his money bag and asked, How much? The waiter chuckled and said, 100 taels of silver. Zhang Shichen had already taken out a few pieces of silver. Hearing this, he raised his head and looked at the waiter in disbelief, asking, What? This official only wanted a pot of tea, and it cost 100 taels of silver. Although the Zhang clan was considered a wealthy clan, they weren't so extravagant as to charge 100 taels of silver for a cup of tea. Under normal circumstances, this was the entire clan's monthly expenses. No. That pot of tea only costs 1 tael of silver. The waiter shook his head and said, But young Master Li said that an inch of time is an inch of gold. You've wasted a lot of his time. Seeing that we're acquaintances, the friendship price is 99 taels. Chapter 821. You dare to charge 100 taels of silver for a pot of tea? Did County Marquis Li forget that I am also an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue? Of course, he didn't have 100 taels of silver. Zhang Shichen threw the money bag to the waiter and hurried out. He looked at the figure in front of him and snorted coldly. Li Yi turned his head and asked, "So what if you are an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue? Can an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue leave early all day, slack off, and drink tea without paying?" Zhang Shichen looked back and said, "If I pursue this matter, this tea house will not be open tomorrow." "That's good. I don't need to be merciful. Master Zhang, remember to wear thicker clothes tomorrow. I don't know how your body is. Can you still threaten me like today after being flogged a few hundred times?" Li Yi smiled indifferently and turned to walk into the yard. "Wait." Zhang Shichen's expression changed. He quickly walked up and stood still. After thinking for a moment he said, "I still have a few words to say to Master Li." Li Yi waved his hand. "No hurry. I will go in and say a few words. You stay here and don't move. If you have anything to say, wait until I come out." "Hey Li, why are you back again?" Xiao Chui squatted in the corridor and rubbed a small doo-doo in the wooden basin. Seeing Li Yi come in, she hurriedly hid the wooden basin behind her and raised her head to ask. Li Yi glanced around nonchalantly and asked, "Where is your young lady?" "Young lady is in the studio," she quickly replied and moved her body to protect the wooden basin behind her. Watching Li Yi walk in, she picked up the wooden basin and ran to the back of the house like a gust of wind. Inside the studio, Zhang Zumo was bending over the table to paint. At this time, she was painting a key part. Hearing the noise at the door, she didn't look up and said, "Xiao Chui, you are done washing. Help me massage my waist." Li Yi was a little surprised. Although some things had been said, the current relationship between the two was still very pure. Other than the accidental holding of hands, hugging, kissing, seeing her change her clothes, showering, there didn't seem to be anything else, right? To be honest, they hadn't even held hands under normal circumstances. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and come over. I've been standing here for so long. I'm so sore." Li Yi nodded in a daze. He slowly walked over, stood behind her, and placed his hands on her waist. She had a strong foundation in dancing since she was young. She would also deliberately do some plastic exercises, so the tightness and delicacy of her slender waist could be felt through her clothes. Li Yi was only absent-minded for a moment before he focused his mind and started massaging. She usually painted standing up. After a long time, parts like her waist and shoulders would be very uncomfortable. After this busy period, he should teach her some basic martial arts. He didn't expect her to become as powerful as Mississippi Lu and the Princess Royal. It would be good enough if she could strengthen her body. "Xiao Chui, you have made great progress these days. Your technique is also different from before. Where did you learn it?" Zhang Zumo finally finished this part. She put down the brush and looked over. "No, it's not 63. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Did you not eat well recently? How did you lose weight again?" Goddess Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. Her body trembled, and she immediately jumped away. She said with a red face, "Why is it you?" "Xiao Chui is washing her underwear outside, so I came in by myself," Li Yi explained. He glanced at the painting on the table and said in surprise, "Who is this painting? He is so handsome and elegant." Zhang Zumo glanced at him and said angrily, "Bah, shameless. How can you say that about yourself?" Li Yi frowned and said, "But Nan, you didn't handle it well here." "Where?" Speaking of the painting, she became serious. She walked over again and looked at the painting on the table. However, the next moment, she raised her head and looked at him in disbelief. She asked, What did you just say?" Li Yi pointed to the painting on the table and said, "I said that you didn't handle it well here." She looked at Li Yi in confusion, thinking that she had heard wrong. She lowered her head again and asked, "What's wrong?" Here should be more angular to match the handsome." Li Yi pointed to a certain outline of the person's face in the painting, then shook his head and said, "But this is not a problem with your painting skills. After all, Nan, you are best at landscape painting." "You? How did you know?" Zhang Zumo took a few steps back and looked at him with a blushing face. She had long forgotten about the problem of painting skills. This was her pet name. To be precise, it should be a baby name. As far as she could remember, there were only 2 or 3 people who called her by this name, except for her parents. Li Yi asked in surprise. What Nan Nan? Don't say it. What's wrong with Nan Nan? Don't call me that. Why Nan Nan Nan? It sounds nice. Ah, Xiao Chui, come quickly, help me shut his mouth. Seeing Li Yi coming out of the yard, Zhang Shichen, who was standing in place, asked in surprise. County Marquis Li, what happened to your face? Nothing. If you have anything to say it now. Xiao Chui, that silly girl, didn't know how to behave properly when she was playing. She made threatening gestures and pushed him down on the bed. The 2 of them were weak, and he couldn't really fight with them. As a result, his face was rubbed red and smeared with a little paint. It took a long time to wash it clean. When Zhang Shichen walked out of the alley side by side with him, he stopped and turned to look at him, asking, You, how far have you gone? Li Yi knew what he was asking. He looked at him and didn't speak. It seems that I asked too much. A hint of understanding appeared on Zhang Shichen's face. After shaking his head, he said solemnly, Zumo has suffered a lot in the past 10 years. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she is today. Treat her well and don't let her suffer again in the future. I will definitely treat her well and not let her suffer again. There is no need to wait until the future. Li Yi glanced at Zhang Shichen and said, On the contrary, Assistant Minister Zhang and your Zhang family, please don't do anything unnecessary. The great change that the Zhang family suffered more than 10 years ago was still a scar in her heart that couldn't be easily opened. Even Li Yi didn't dare to mention those things easily. Although the Zhang family was small, it had a great impact on her. Zhang Shichen looked up at him and said, County Marquis Li, don't forget that Zumo's surname is Zhang. She is a member of our Zhang family. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to say this. That was in the past. Li Yi looked at him calmly. It won't be in the future. You. Zhang Shichen's face showed anger, but Li Yi didn't look at him again and turned to leave. Watching him get on the carriage, Zhang Shichen stood there for a long time. At a certain moment, the anger on his face disappeared, and a faint smile gradually crept up. In this way, I can rest assured. He murmured and turned to leave. The smile on his face disappeared, and he seemed to be in deep thought. King of Shu, what a waste of effort. In the carriage, Fong tilted his head and looked at him. Young master, are we going home? Yes. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Let's go to Dong Street first. Go to Dong Street? The sloppy old man opened his eyes and asked, Why do we go to Dong Street? From here, we almost have to go around half of the capital. I told you to go, so go. Why do you talk so much nonsense? Fong shook the reins, glanced at him and said in a bad mood. Coming out of Fuji, Fong's mouth was full, but he didn't forget to praise, Young master, the candied fruits of Fuji taste really good. The sloppy old man threw a piece of dried fruit into his mouth and nodded. Fuji's candied fruits and pastries are famous in the capital. More than 10 years ago, it should be called Suji. Suji, Fuji. Why don't we call it Su Fuji from now on? Li Yi carried the box full of candied fruits and pastries into the carriage. He turned back and pointed to the shop on the side and said to Fong, "Buy it." Chapter 822. Xiaofan held a big box of candied plums and asked, "Young master, do you want to give some of these candied plums to Miss?" Li Yi thought for a moment and shook his head. "Forget it. Miss likes to eat sour food now and doesn't like sweet food. Let's talk about it later." The little maid nodded, blinked her eyes and asked, "What about second Miss?" Li Yi waved a paper bag in his hand and said, "I'll send it to second Mississippi. You can ask someone to put it in the freezer first." Speaking of which, he had been back for a while, but he didn't see Mississippi Lu practicing outside. She should be in her room. Li Yi carried the paper bag with the candied pastries and walked to the door of her room. The door wasn't closed, so he pushed it open gently. He looked into the room and said, "I bought some candied plums on my way back. Do you want to?" Mississippi Lu was really in her room, sitting on a small stool. In front of her was a wooden basin with water and Li Yi felt very strange. Could it be that today was really a special day? Was there any ceremony or custom for women to choose to wash their underwear on this day? Mississippi Lu looked up at him, and Li Yi looked down at her and the wooden basin. It was pink and embroidered with lotus flowers. If I say that I didn't do it on purpose, would you believe me? Li Yi asked with a sincere face. Mississippi Lu took the pink belly band out of the wooden basin and hung it in the room. Then she asked, "What's the matter?" Li Yi raised his hand and gestured to the paper bag in his hand. "The candied plums of Fuji are very delicious. Do you want to try it?" "Put it there," Mississippi Lu said lightly. After glancing at him, she walked over and stared at his neck. Li Yi's heart inexplicably tightened and asked, "What are you looking at?" Mississippi Lu looked up at him. "What do you think?" "Don't tell me there's another lipstick?" Li Yi couldn't see what was on her neck. Even if there was, Fong should have reminded him just now. However, looking at her expression, he still said with some uncertainty, "I remember that I washed it many times just now. It should be nothing. Don't worry, there are no lipstick marks." Mississippi Lu shook her head and reached out to help him tidy up his collar. Then she looked up and asked, "Why are you washing your neck for no reason?" Li Yi looked around and murmured, "Even if it's for no reason, I still have to pay attention to my hygiene. There's no law in the Jing Kingdom that forbids washing one's neck for no reason. Oh, by the way, your lip gloss looks good today. Where can I buy it?" "Hey, ears, don't twist your ears." Fuji had become Su Fuji. This process was not complicated at all. For the currently family, anything that could be solved with money would not be complicated at all. Li Yi sat in the yard eating the free candied plums. His ears were still aching, but he always felt that Mississippi Lu had become much gentler recently. Although he was influenced by the company he kept with Rui for a long time, it was normal for the female Tyrannosaurus to become a little sheep. However, the effects of the influence of the past 10 years were not reflected in just a few months. Compared to drawing out her sword at the slightest disagreement, twisting ears was already considered very gentle. As for the sudden gentleness of Mississippi Lu, he actually felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Then, he felt that it was a little cheap. Could it be that he had subconscious tendencies of being a masochist? Then, he felt that he was thinking too much. After all, he didn't always provoke her for no reason. Looking at Mississippi Lu, who was practicing swordsmanship at the side, he considered a certain question for a long time. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, "Rui, do you think that sky blue suits you better than pink?" Li Yi rubbed his ears again. It turned out that Mississippi Lu might not like sky blue. Although Li Yi felt that the new sky blue dress from clothing shop was good, it had been more than a month since he gave it to her, and he had never seen her wear it. The 4 female doctors are all carefully selected, and they are also the most outstanding among all the female doctors. They have a clean background, and each of them has the experience of delivering more than 100 babies, so there won't be any problem in dealing with emergencies, Emingzu said, then looked at him and said, "If you have any other requests, just tell me." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You know Rui. Her body isn't weak, so there shouldn't be any problems. Instead, you should pay more attention to Shizafai." Rui and Shizafai's birth date was very close, so it was still unknown who gave birth. Li Xian wasn't too worried. He said, "The imperial physician and great master Tan Yin have been invited to the palace by her ladyship. They take Qin'er's pulse several times a day, so there shouldn't be any problems." Finishing, he looked at Emingzu and asked, Don't you feel the slightest discomfort in your heart?" "Why would I feel discomfort?" Emingzu looked at him and asked in confusion. Li Xian opened his mouth, then waved his hand after a moment. He said, "Forget it, I spoke too much." Li Yi tilted his head and looked at Emingzu. He asked, "How are the matters in court recently?" Rui was doing well and there was nothing for him to worry about. Although there was still some time before she was due to give birth, the family had already made all the necessary preparations. Even the confinement room had been built and all the necessary facilities were available. In the dead of winter, the temperature outside would probably only be slightly above 0 degrees. There was a hot water circulation pipe in the room that had been tested many times and was able to control the room temperature at a suitable temperature. Of course, after Li Xian had seen all the facilities in the house once, he had copied them all. Emingzu nodded and said, "In 2 months, it will be the New Year's Day. The court has been peaceful and there hasn't been anything else." There wasn't anything else to this. Only the 2 of them understood the deeper meaning behind it. Li Yi was a little confused. Although he had only revealed a sentence to Zhang Shichen last time, He had already made his meaning very clear. At this point, there was indeed no need to hide some things. Although this would lead to a greater counterattack from King of Shu's faction, their counterattack had never been small. However, he didn't care. Only when they made a move could he think of countermeasures and eliminate the remaining forces of King of Shu's faction bit by bit. However, it had been nearly 2 months since he last saw Zhang Shichen, and there was no movement from the King of Shu at all. This didn't make sense. Was it because the King of Shu was waiting for his skills to cool down and make a big wave of trouble, or because Zhang Shichen didn't tell them about it at all? The latter was unlikely. After all, the Zheng family had been tied to the King of Shu for so many years. If the King of Shu succeeded, he would be a subordinate of the emperor and have a bright future. He wouldn't betray the king at this time, would he? Whether Zhang Shichen had told him or not, there was no way to confirm. 2 months ago, he had been sent by the princess to another province on a business trip as punishment for slacking off and leaving work early. Recently, he had almost run through the provinces adjacent to Jingdo, and it would probably be a few days before he returned. The end of autumn and the beginning of winter in the 3rd year of Jing, he couldn't be more normal. These days, the country was stable, the foreign enemies were temporarily resting, and there was no turmoil in the court. Especially since the Princess Royal Highness took charge of the government, the people lived in peace and praised the many decrees of the court. As a result, everyone almost forgot that during this period of time, standing at the top of the country was a woman. This peace and tranquility lasted until the 15th of November. Because the night before, the first snow fell in the capital. When many people opened their doors in the morning, they found that there was a vast expanse of whiteness in front of them. And also because the night before, in the Marquis Mansion of Chong'an County, the young master of the Li family was born. Chapter 823. After a night of heavy snow, although it cleared up at dawn, the temperature still plummeted. Who knew how many people were caught off guard by this first snow, and because they didn't have any clothes to wear, they were so cold that they cried for their parents. In the Li family, in the greenhouse, because the copper pipes close to the wall circulated hot water, after closing the door, they didn't feel cold at all. In the past, Xiaofan would have run to the yard to make a snowman, but today, she just moved a small stool and sat in front of the bed, looking at the little eyes in the swaddling clothes. She had been looking for almost an hour, but she still couldn't get enough of it. After a while she turned back and whispered, "Hee, his nose is like the son-in-law, and his eyes are like Miss." Nonsense, he didn't even open his eyes. Li Yi gently knocked on her head. Xiao Huan immediately retracted her head and whispered, "I saw him last night." As a person who had lived 2 lives, this was his first child. Naturally, Li Yi couldn't get enough of it, but he didn't think the child looked like anyone or not. A newborn child didn't even have eyes and eyebrows, so these things couldn't be seen. Sitting on the bed, Rui's face was a little pale. Giving birth was hard for women, and it was like walking through the gates of hell. Even a grandmaster was not much better than an ordinary person. She looked at the child, and a faint smile appeared on her slightly tired face. Then she sighed and said, "It's a pity that you like daughters." Although she said this, she didn't know how happy she was. Some ideas were deeply rooted here, and even Rui couldn't avoid them. Li Yi tucked her in and said, "It's okay, we can have more in the future. There will be daughters." Outsiders were not allowed in the confinement room. Although only Rui and Xiao Huan were here, hearing this, she couldn't help blushing. She changed the topic and said, "Husband, what do you think we should name him?" In fact, as early as a few months ago, Li Yi and she had prepared a few names, both boys and girls. Li Yi didn't name his children according to the Li family's genealogy, nor did he plan to name his children in this way. Originally, if he had a daughter, it would be good to call her Li Si or Li Muyi. For a boy, this name would be a bit feminine. Moreover, he was the eldest son of the Li family, so he naturally had to choose a more neutral name. There were already a few names that they could come up with, but the 2 of them had yet to decide which one to use. Li Xian? Li Yi repeated the name, then shook his head and said, "I feel like I've heard this name somewhere before. It's not good." Li Xiaoyao? He read another one and shook his head. "This won't do. This life is too bitter and rough. It's not good either. Li Bai, you're indeed suitable for the occasion, but I'm afraid that you won't be able to control it. Why don't we call him Dwainer?" Rui thought for a while, then looked at him and said, "He is the eldest son of the Li family. I hope that he can be a good person in the future and act according to the rules, so that he can be a good example to his younger brothers and sisters. Li Duan? Li Yi didn't want to give the child any cool name. Li Duan was actually not bad, but it sounded a bit short. The word short made him feel uncomfortable no matter how he heard it. A name is just a form of address. Although it is good to have a meaning, it has little to do with one's character or fate in the future. Li Yi thought for a while and said, if a name can represent fate, then isn't Rui too much of an advantage? As soon as he finished speaking, he was kicked lightly by Mississippi Lu. Li Yi looked at the swaddled child. Since Rui could bring it up, it meant that she liked the name very much. He nodded and said, Duana, Li Duan. And very good. I'll do as my wife says. The little servant girl looked at the child sleeping soundly in the swaddled clothes and said in a small voice, Duaner, you have a name. You guys have been busy all night yesterday. Go and rest first. Last night, after the child was born, everyone in the manor didn't sleep well. Li Yi said to Xiaofan and Mississippi Lu, then looked at Rui and said, you haven't slept since yesterday. Go and rest for a while. I'll deal with the matters outside. The greenhouse was so quiet and peaceful, but in fact, the outside had long been a boiling pot. Since last night, this place had become the focus of the entire capital. Especially after the news that County Marquis Li had a son and that both mother and son were safe spread out, many officials and nobles in the capital couldn't sit still. The carriages and horses that came to congratulate and give gifts had long been lined up 2 streets away. The servant girls and servants of the Li Manor had all been mobilized. Just counting the rooms for storing gifts, they had already prepared 4 rooms. The youngest marquis in the court, the youngest minister of the golden-purple imperial court, and the emperor's most favored official. Even the nobles and officials who usually didn't have any interaction had to prepare enough gifts at this time. The old emperor's edict came early in the morning. Other than bringing a lot of rewards, Rui's title of nobility was directly raised by 2 levels. After that, there was also the empress's decree, the princess's manor, the crown prince's manor, and more than a dozen carriages of gifts. Usually, Li Yi didn't like to socialize, but today was different. Others came with gifts, so he had to go through the formalities. Just this formalities took him from dawn to dusk. When a servant came to tell him that the madam and the child had both woken up and that the madam was talking inside, Li Yi found that the sky was already a bit dark. Duaner, this is a good name. The smile on the face of the madam of the Li family hadn't stopped since last night. The old woman had been living in the manor for the past few days. She had originally fallen asleep yesterday, but she was suddenly woken up and hadn't slept since. Before the child was born, she seemed to be more anxious than Li Yi. After the child was born, she was busy inside and outside, sending letters outside one after another. Until now she hadn't rested, but she seemed more energetic than anyone else. Although the other madam couldn't see, she was also sitting next to Rui's bed. At this moment, she was holding her hand and saying something. Li Yi listened. It should be some precautions during the confinement period. In fact, he didn't need someone to teach him these things. He knew it better than anyone else. Originally, he wanted to persuade the 2 old people to go back and rest first, but seeing the situation in front of him, he felt that they probably wouldn't listen, so he quietly left. No matter what, his heart was still a little worried for so long that now, he could finally take a long breath of relief. Today, everyone in the manor was busy all day, so that only a passage was swept out of the courtyard. In the courtyard, around the stone table, there was still a layer of not too thin snow. Li Yi cleared a stone stool and sat down. Not long after, there was a crunching sound of stepping on the snow. Li Xian looked tired. He cleared another stone stool, sat next to Li Yi, and asked, "Are you busy enough today? How do you have time to come over?" The reason why Li Yi asked this was because this afternoon, there was news from the palace that Li Xian's heir consort had also given birth. Both the adult and the child were safe, but it was a girl. Li Xian probably didn't have any other thoughts about this, but the heir consort would probably be sad for a while. Li Xian shook his head and said, "Her ladyship said that she needed to rest, so I stayed with her for a while. When she fell asleep, I directly came over." "Congratulations." Li Yi cupped his hands in a salute. Li Xian casually replied, "Congratulations to you too." The heir consort's body was weak, and it would probably affect the child. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "How is the child's health?" Speaking of his daughter, a smile appeared on Li Xian's face. he said. When she was born, she cried loudly and her body was a little weak, but the imperial physician said that she was fine for the first month, and then there were no problems. What about the heir consort? Li Xian shook his head and said, she's fine. Her body is a little weak, and this time, her vitality might have been injured. She needs to rest, but it's not a big deal. However, she has always wanted to have a son. Li Yi could understand the heir consort's thoughts, but this matter couldn't be forced. He stood up and patted Li Xian's shoulder, saying, if there's nothing else, try to persuade her. Actually, it's not bad to have a daughter. Chapter 824. It seems to be about the same as Brother Xian's child. I can't even tell if it's a boy or a girl. The proud lowly leaned against the window and looked around before saying, Sir, is it very painful to give birth? Yesterday, when Sister Chiner gave birth, she was outside. That heart-wrenching sound still made her heart tremble. Li Yi nodded and said, yes, it hurts a lot. The proud lowly hesitated for a moment before asking, then, how painful is it? Does it hurt more than the last time I cut my hand while cutting vegetables? Last time when she was making soup for her father, she accidentally hurt her hand. At that time, those palace maids and eunuchs were all scared out of their wits, but she endured it and didn't let her father punish them. However, at that time, she also felt that it was the most painful thing she had ever experienced. Li Yi looked inside the room and saw a large and small figure on the bed. His gaze softened as he nodded and said, it's 100 times, 1,000 times more painful than the pain of cutting your hand. 100 times, 1,000 times? The proud lowly, who had excellent math scores, naturally knew what this meant. Her face turned pale and she ran, shouting as she ran, then I won't give birth, I won't give birth. Li Yi rubbed his hands and covered Yongning's ears, which were red from the cold. He carried her into a room, where a few of the Li residence's maids were busy. When he saw Li Yi enter, he immediately stood up. Seeing that they were about to stand up and bow, Li Yi waved his hand and said, no need, sit down. How's the progress? Replying to the marquis, it's almost done. Let me see. Li Yi took the things they were sewing from one of the maids, nodded and said, not bad, continue. Although this thing wasn't like Sophie's elastic body that wouldn't leak no matter how hard it was turned, the effect was definitely much better than the one that was commonly used now. It could also be considered an invention that benefited thousands of women. However, he didn't want to be called the father of XXX in the future, so it was better to inspire Li Xian. This could also be considered a new research project for the Academy of Sciences. Husband, what is this for? Rui leaned against the headboard, holding something in her hand. She looked at it over and over, and then asked Li Yi in confusion. This. Li Yi leaned over and whispered a few words in her ear. Ah! Hearing this, Rui immediately threw the things in her hands aside and said with a red face, this, husband, how can you do this by yourself? They didn't do it by hand. They sewed it. Rui was a little anxious. In short, if this gets out, it will be very improper. What will they say about you? Li Yi waved his hand and said, don't tell anyone about this. In short, this is better than the previous one. It's just right for us to use now, but it's not done yet. I'll ask them to hurry up. When he walked out of the door with the semi-finished product, a voice came from beside him. Mississippi Lu leaned against the door, pointed at the thing in his hand and asked, what is this? You mean this? Li Yi waved his hand and said, insoles. He looked at Mississippi Lu and said, it's cold, isn't it? My feet will be cold if I don't pad my shoes with something. Do you want it? I'll ask them to make a few pairs for you. Insoles? Mississippi Lu looked at him with a look of disbelief. She pointed at the parts that extended from both sides of the insoles and asked, what is this? Wings. Li Yi looked at her in surprise. Don't you think the insoles with wings are very beautiful? Mississippi Lu stared at his eyes and asked, what on earth is this? Li Yi looked at her and asked uncertainly, insoles? Well, this is not an insole. She was not an outsider anyway. Li Yi looked around and whispered a few words in her ear. Shameless. After listening, Mississippi Lu's face instantly turned red and she glared at him fiercely. Li Yi looked at her. You're the one who asked. Can't you be reasonable? Pervert. Don't you know the law? Shameless. Shameless. I said it just now. Shameless. She glared at Li Yi again, snatched the thing from his hand, and walked quickly into the room. Hey, wait, I haven't told you how to use it. Mississippi Lu turned her head and looked at him calmly. She asked, You want to teach me? No. Li Yi shook his head and said, The insoles haven't been sown yet. It was a great merit that could benefit all women in the world and be passed down for hundreds or even thousands of generations as long as human beings did not evolve further. However, he was still scolded as shameless. In this world, there was really no law. However, in this world there were two people he could not talk to. The Princess Royal was one, because she was the law. Mississippi Lu was the other, because the price of talking to her about the law was too high, and ordinary people could not afford it. Logically speaking, the Li family had just added a child, so he should be very busy. According to etiquette, he should visit some people in person and report the good news in person. However, old Madam had already arranged all these for him. There was only one thing he needed to do, and that was to take care of Rui. Although her physique was far better than ordinary women, this kind of care was not only physical, but also spiritual. In terms of postpartum recovery, soup was indispensable. Li Yi did not dare to say how good his cooking skills were, but in terms of soup making, he had definitely reached the level of a master. He was extraordinary and invincible in the world. Not long after entering the kitchen and placing the ingredients into the clay pot, a servant came to report that Minister Chan had come to visit. Although it was said that Minister Chan had come to visit, Li Yi knew that this had nothing to do with Chen Chong. He had Xiaofan look after the soup and quickly walked out. Outside the residence, Chen Chong stood at the door, rubbing his hands in the cold. He did not forget to look back at the sedan and said, Meow you, it's cold outside. Don't come down yet. Seeing Li Yi walk out, he reluctantly cupped his hands. County Marquis Li. Li Yi quickly walked past Chen Chong. When third Miss Chen came down from the sedan, he softly said, The ground is slippery, be careful. Then he frowned and looked back at Chen Chong. How do you take care of people? It's such a cold day, and you don't even prepare a fox fur coat. What are you thinking? Chen Chong still maintained his cupped hands gesture. Behind him, a servant girl had already taken out a fox fur coat from the sedan and draped it over third Miss Chen. It's so thin, can it keep out the cold? Can't you be more careful? Li Yi glared at him again, then turned his head and said with a smile, Quickly go in, it's warm inside. Second Master. Second Master? Seeing Second Master still maintaining his cupped hands gesture, the Chen family servant could not help but remind him. Chen Chong closed his eyes and took a deep breath before opening them again. He calmly said, Go in. Walking side by side with third Miss Chen, she asked softly, There were too many people in the residence these past few days, so I did not come over. Is Rui well? Li Yi smiled and nodded. Her body is recovering very well, and the child is also very well. When she reached the door of the room, she paused and shook her head. She just came from outside and is very cold. She can't stand these things the most right now. Let's sit in the greenhouse for a while before going over. Li Yi thought for a moment, then nodded and said, The greenhouse is just next door. This way, please. Xiaofan, bring some tea and pastries over. After staying in the greenhouse for 15 minutes, Li Yi led her over again. After sending her into the room, he placed a hand on Chen Chong's shoulder. What are you going in for? Don't you know any manners? Chen Chong's face twitched. He was about to explode when a petite figure ran over from the other side. Chen Chong froze for a moment, then quickly retracted the anger on his face. He immediately bowed. This lowly official pays his respects to Princess Xiaoning. The proud Lolita ignored Chen Chong. Holding Li Yi's hand, she blinked pitifully and said, Sir, can I only have one child in the future? Chapter 825. What did the princess just say? After sending the proud Lolita off to play with Duan Wu and Yong Ning, Chen Chong finally couldn't help but turn his head and ask, How would I know what to give birth to? Li Yi calmly glanced at him. How about I call the princess over and you ask her face to face? Chen Chong naturally didn't dare to ask her face to face. He asked in confusion, Then what did your highness just say? Only one? Li Yi shook his head and said, Perhaps she was talking about giving birth to a child? Chen Chong disdainfully glanced at him. It was one thing to have an ambiguous relationship with the eldest princess, but how old was Princess Xiaoning? If he remembered correctly, Princess Xiaoning was only 14 years old. According to the current laws of the Jing Kingdom, she was not yet of age. No matter how much the emperor favored him, could he bear the crime of abducting the little princess? After entering the room and sitting down, Li Yi did not say anything. Although Chen Chong was a person who did not know how to read people, and Li Yi did not like him no matter how he looked at him, it was not a good idea to leave him here alone. When the third young mistress came out later and saw him here, she would not feel good either. Chen Chong knew that Li Yi was very dissatisfied with him, but they were under the eaves. Even if he was displeased, he could only endure it for the sake of his third sister. However, there was a limit to a person's patience. Even though this was a warm room, after a long time, the tea would turn cold and not taste good. The two of them were silent for a long time. The pastries that had been placed here had long been eaten by Li Yi alone. If he didn't even have tea to drink, he really didn't know what to do. The tea is cold, Chen Chong finally couldn't help but remind him. Li Yi glanced at him and said, herbal tea can clear away heat and relieve heat. It also has the effect of lowering internal heat. Official Chen seems to have quite a temper. So why don't you drink some more? Chen Chong took a deep breath and said, this official has been in a very good mood recently. I don't have any temper. Official Chen even has a pimple on his forehead. This is a sign of excessive internal heat. It's just that I've been sleeping a little late these past 2 days. Not only that, Lord Chen's eyes are bloodshot, and the corners of his mouth are rotting. These are all signs of excessive internal heat. I wonder if Lord Chen has been feeling thirsty and has been suffering from insomnia for the past few days. Pah! Chen Chong slammed his palm on the table. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breathing was ragged. He bellowed angrily. This official said that there's no such thing. All right, if Lord Chen says there isn't, then there isn't. Li Yi nodded and waved to a maid standing at the door. Go, bring another pot of herbal tea for Lord Chen. This Lord Chen really treated his kindness as ill intent. From his facial features, it was clear that he was suffering from excessive internal heat, but he still refused to admit that herbal tea was good for the body. Although the herbal tea of the Li family was not Jia Duobao or Wang Laoji, herbal tea sounded similar to cold tea, and the effect should not be much different, right? No matter what, the Li family was a wealthy family, and anyone who came was a guest. As the head of the clan, was it really necessary for him to be so stingy as to not even offer a cup of hot tea? Li Yi shook his head and said, Lord Chen is busy with official business and overworked. It's not strange for these symptoms to appear. But although there are many official business, your health is equally important. Lord Chen should pay more attention. Compared to some people, he is indeed much busier. Chen Chong glanced at Li Yi and said, however, compared to some of his colleagues in court, he is still a little lacking. Assistant Minister Zhang of the Ministry of Revenue has been running around for the court these days, unable to enter his home. That is what is truly busy. Li Yi nodded and said, who would have thought that Assistant Minister Zhang, who is usually lazy and lethargic, would really put his life on the line when it comes to work? He is truly a role model for our generation. His tone changed as he said, from Lord Chen's words, it seems that you have some complaints about this. I have long heard that Lord Chen and Assistant Minister Zhang are close friends. Could it be that Lord Chen thinks that the court is too harsh on Assistant Minister Zhang? In reality, what he had heard was not close friends. Previously, there had been rumors in court about the love affair between Minister Chen Chong and Assistant Minister Zhang Shichen of the Ministry of Revenue. It was not something that could be described with just close friends. Of course, even if the rumors were true and the two of them were gay, that was their private matter. As outsiders, they had no right to meddle in their affairs. There are no complaints. However, a few days ago, when Assistant Minister Zhang and County Marquis Li were chatting in a tea house, there were rumors that the two of them did not get along. Chen Chong looked at Li Yi and seemed to be thinking of something. He opened his mouth and said, Assistant Minister Zhang works hard without complaint and is a pillar of the country. I hope that County Marquis Li will not be unable to distinguish between public and private affairs. Which rumors are these? Li Yi shook his head and said, why would I purposely make things difficult for an important official over such a small matter? Moreover, these matters are not something that I can casually make decisions on. Li took a sip of tea, but he was truly puzzled. Looking at Chen Chong's appearance, Zhang Shichen clearly did not reveal the conversation between the two of them that day. No wonder the king of Shu's faction had been too quiet these days. It was so quiet that even he was not used to it. He had originally thought that since they were able to endure all this and did not reveal it, it would definitely be a thunderous blow. Now, it seemed that Zhang Shichen had not told them what happened that day at all. Not normal. This was really not normal. While Li Yi was thinking about these things, Chen Chong's gaze was also fixed on his face. That day, he knew that Zhang Shichen and Li Yi had a brief conversation, but Zhang Shichen had always been secretive about what they had talked about and was unwilling to reveal it. This made him even more puzzled. Of course, other than puzzled, there was also a trace of annoyance, or perhaps anger. Between the two of them, there were clearly some things that had been said very openly. At the very least, he, Chen Chong, did not hide too much from Zhang Shichen, but the conversation between him and a third party, Li Yi, had actually been kept from him. Hateful, this was truly hateful. Official Chen, what's wrong? Li Yi looked at Chen Chong, who was suddenly filled with anger and had clearly lost his composure, and asked in confusion. It's nothing. Chen Chong glared at him fiercely and drained the cup of herbal tea in one gulp. Li Yi did not pay too much attention to it. He was just surprised by Zhang Shichen's behavior. To hide such an important matter and not report it, he was clearly an extremely unqualified teammate. Although Assistant Minister Zhang wasn't a good teammate, he was clearly a good opponent. Originally, he had wanted to ask him if the Chui family had made any moves recently. However, Sir Zhang had been working hard for the people these days and hadn't been able to see him for a long time. He didn't know if he could get any useful information from Steward Chen. Li Yi took down the teapot from the stove and poured a cup of hot tea for him. He casually asked, "What has official Chen been busy with these days?" Chen Chong held the teacup to warm his hands and also casually replied, "Nothing much, just thinking of a way to transfer His Highness, the King of Shu, back from Suzhou. Capital Magistrate Dong Wan-yun will soon be transferred to the Secretariat of Governmental Affairs. This position is extremely important and needs to be fought for. Also, Great Scholar Chu, who is known as the Scholar of the Jing Kingdom, has returned to the capital to give a lecture. The Chu family also needs to contact and recruit him." Li Yi really spat out a mouthful of tea. These two people were extremely important to the King of Shu's faction. Zhang Shichen knew about it but did not report it, and Chen Chong had casually leaked such important information to the enemy. Look, what kind of people the King of Shu and the Chui family had recruited. Under such circumstances, if they were allowed to succeed, where was the justice of the heavens? Where was the justice of the heavens? Chapter 826. Reality proved that hot tea seemed to be more effective at calming one's anger than cold tea. After a cup of hot tea, the anger on Chen Yizhong's face immediately subsided. Putting down the teacup, Chen Chong calmly looked at Li Yi and asked, "Then, what has County Marquis Li been busy with these days?" For a moment, Li Yi could not figure out why Chen Chong had revealed all that information. Was it because of the cold tea and hot tea that his brain had become muddled? Or was he purposely giving out false information to disrupt his rhythm? Or was it because he had found his conscience and was heartbroken that he had decided to forsake the darkness for the light? As expected, after saying so much, he was still trying to get information from him. His intentions were extremely bad. Li Yi raised his teacup and smiled. What else could he be busy with? Busy for nothing. Chen Yizhong put down the teacup and took a deep breath. The anger that he had just suppressed seemed to be on the verge of erupting again. Seemingly feeling that the room was stuffy, Chen Chong stood up, pulled aside the heavy curtains by the door, and stood in the corridor. The servants of the Li family had long since cleared away the snow. Although the weather had become increasingly cold, there had been no more snow. Other than some white on the eaves, there was very little snow anywhere else. Chen Chong's breath condensed into white mist in the air as he said with his back to Li Yi, "That night, Miao Yu wanted to come and take a look. She thought about it for several days and did not sleep much these past few nights, so she decided to come today." Li Yi looked at the black tiles on the eaves and slowly said, "Third Miss can come here whenever she wants. There is no need to pick a time. But this place is still surnamed Li." Chen Chong turned back to look at him, his eyes unfocused and his expression somewhat perplexed. "Li Yi, County Marquis Li, tell me, what should I do?" At this moment, Chen Chong was something that Li Yi had never seen before. He was ruthless and decisive. This was the impression that Li Yi had of Chen Chong. But at this moment, he truly felt the other's perplexity and hesitation. Although he did not know what he was perplexed about, it was probably an extremely important matter. He could not answer this question. Not far away, the heavy curtain of the room was lifted, and the figure of third Miss Chen walked out. Chen Chong looked back at Li Yi with a complicated gaze. Then, he quickly walked in that direction. However, before he reached the corridor, he suddenly stopped, because two figures had appeared in front of third Miss Chen. "May I have a few words with you?" The blind old lady was supported by a woman. Although she couldn't see, she still raised her head. Chen Miaoyu was taken aback for a moment. She asked doubtfully, "I wonder if the old man—" Old mistress lowered her head and said with a trembling voice, "Lady Jade is my daughter." Hearing this name, Chen Miaoyu's body trembled. Her originally rosy complexion turned pale in an instant, and all the blood drained from her face. Chen Chong paled. Just as he was about to go over, a hand pressed down on his shoulder from behind. Li Yi looked ahead and said in a low voice, "She will feel better if we talk things out." As if her soul had been sucked out of her body, she walked into the room in a daze. The name Lady Jade still echoed in Chen Miaoyu's ears. How could she forget this name? How could she dare to forget it? Her husband, her soon-to-be married husband, had held that woman's hand and left her. This name had been forever engraved in her heart. It could never be erased. Every time she touched it, she would feel a pain that was no less painful than when she had carved it with a knife. Two noises came from the front, causing her to snap out of her thoughts at this moment. The old lady and the woman had knelt down in front of her. The old lady's voice was choked with emotion. "Miss, our He family has let you down?" Seeing that Chen Chong had suddenly become anxious and was pacing back and forth, his fists clenched so tightly that the veins on his hands were bulging, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Official Chen, would you like to go in for a cup of tea?" Chen Chong impatiently waved his hand. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly stopped and bowed. This lowly official pays his respects to the princess. The proud Lolita clasped her hands behind her back and walked back in a ladylike manner. She nodded and said, "I have something to say to Sir." "Go to the side first." "Yes." Hearing this, Chen Chong glanced at Li Yi, then turned and strode away. The proud Lolita skipped over to Li Yi and said, "Sir, I'm not afraid of pain. I've decided. I want to have 2 children in the future, a boy and a girl. It's just right." Crack! Chen Chong, who had been about to walk down the corridor, twisted his leg and stumbled. His entire body rolled down. He curled up on the cold ground and hugged his ankles. The veins on his forehead bulged and he broke out in a cold sweat. However, he did not care at all. His eyes were wide open as he stared at Li Yi, who was standing on top of him. He could not make a single sound. "Aya, what's wrong with official Chen? How could he be so careless?" Li Yi walked over in shock. He waved his hand at a servant of the Li family and ordered, "Quick, quick, call a doctor over." You. Chen Chong's face was filled with shock. In a low voice he said, You're disgraceful." Li Yi frowned and crouched down to look at him. He asked, "Official Chen, what are you saying? How am I disgraceful?" "I heard everything just now." Chen Chong's forehead was covered in cold sweat. His face was scrunched up in pain, but he was not talking about his sprained ankle. "The princess said that she wants to give you children too. Ah! How could such a private conversation be heard by an outsider?" When the proud Lolita who had followed them heard this, she covered her face and ran away. Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and said, "The princess is still young. A child's words carry no harm. Official Chen, could it be that you think I'm such an unreasonable person?" The suspicion on Chen Chong's face lessened. Indeed, with the princess's status, if something like that really happened, she would not be standing here talking to him right now. Then his face darkened and he said, "The princess's body is priceless. No matter how close the two of you are, you still have to pay attention to these things." Fortunately, only this official heard it today. If it were to reach His Majesty's ears. These words sounded strange to Li Yi. What did she mean by fortunately? Only he heard it today. This should be counted as unfortunate, right? However, Shawnee was used to spouting nonsense. Sometimes, she would not restrain herself in front of the old emperor. Other than herself, no one would take her words seriously. Even so, it was time for him to have a proper talk with her about these matters. If this continued and he encountered people with ulterior motives, they might really accuse him of abducting the princess. Li Yi looked at Chen Chong and nodded. Official Chen, do not worry. I have always done things with a clear conscience. In the future, I will remind the princess. Clear conscience. Chen Chong snorted. Including the uncooked dumplings that you gave this official and assistant minister Zhang? Li Yi was startled and asked in surprise. Uncooked? Let's not bring up the matters of the past in the future. You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything. Inside the room, Chen Miaoyu helped the old man up and calmly said these words. Then, she pushed open the door and walked out. When she saw the situation in the courtyard, her expression changed. She quickly walked over and asked in concern, Second brother, what's wrong? Chen Chong gave a dry smile and said, The road was slippery and I accidentally fell. Crack. The slovenly old man shook his wrist and stood up. It's just a sprain. It's not a big deal. After you go back and rest for 3 to 5 days, you'll be able to walk normally. Chen Chong touched his ankle in surprise and found that it really didn't hurt anymore. He raised his head and asked, I can get up now? If you don't feel that your butt is cold, you can lie down a bit longer. The slovenly old man lightly tossed out these words and left with a flick of his sleeve. Li Yi smiled and said, Our family's physician has a rather bad temper. Please don't mind him. After sending off third young Miss Chen and the limping Chen Chong, he walked back, feeling as if he had forgotten something. At a certain moment, he suddenly exclaimed, My soup! Fortunately, Xiaofan was watching and he didn't miss the time. Li Yi scooped a bowl of soup and sat by the bed. Chapter 827. Second Miss had a child. Why did the son-in-law make soup? In the eyes of the little servant girl, this matter was very strange. But after she asked this question, everyone's expression became strange. The son-in-law even slapped her but to stop her from talking nonsense. How was this nonsense? When Second Miss had a child in the future, things like making soup would naturally be done by her husband. How could it be the son-in-law? Unless... The little servant girl had already walked out of the door, but suddenly stopped. Her pretty face showed a look of realization. Right, in this way, the son-in-law was still the son-in-law, Second Miss was still Second Miss, and it was reasonable for the son-in-law to make soup for Second Mississippi. She was originally worried that after Second Miss got married, she would not be able to see her often. If this was the case, they would still be together in the future. Wouldn't there be nothing to worry about? Thinking of this, the little servant girl's big bright eyes could not help but become brighter. Because a problem that had troubled her for a long time seemed to have found a perfect solution. Li Yi found that Xiaofan had been talking more and more openly recently. She always mentioned the topic of making soup intentionally or unintentionally. Mississippi Lu would not blame her, but the way she looked at him was strange. Although he was open-minded, he could not help but feel guilty when she looked at him like this for a long time. He did not know what she was thinking. Was she worried that he would have any thoughts about her? How could that be possible? She was Lu Rui, the vicious second daughter of the Lu family. She was the biggest evil force in the family. How could he have any thoughts about her? Yes, probably, maybe. Impossible, right? Compared with Mississippi Lu, who became more and more strange and made him feel uncertain, Rui made him feel much more at ease. After all, she was not an ordinary woman. In terms of physique, she was already at the peak of the world's women. In addition, she was nourished by various decoctions. In fact, her body had almost recovered half a month after giving birth. The confinement room was almost airtight. Although she would breathe regularly every day, it would still be stuffy after a long time. She only lived in it for half a month before moving out. Li Yi looked at the little fellow in the swaddling clothes and touched his nose. Although it was only 1 month and he could not even crawl, he would deliberately hide in Rui's arms. Li Yi helped him tuck in the swaddling clothes and whispered, "Dwainer, be a good boy and call me father." Rui could not help laughing and shook her head. "Husband, you are too impatient. How can a child speak so fast?" "At least a few months later he will call me father." Li Yi thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Wife, why don't we bet on whether he learns to call me father or mother first? A smile appeared on Rui's pretty face and she said, "Then my husband will definitely lose. He has been by my side from morning to night, so he must have learned to call me mother first." "Not necessarily." Li Yi shook his head and said, "This kind of thing still depends on luck." Looking at him, Rui asked, "Then how do you want to bet?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "How about the bet? The loser will agree to one condition of the winner." "Okay." Rui did not hesitate either. She looked at him and said, "Husband, you must keep your word. I will be the judge, I will be the judge." Lolita rolled her eyes and said, "I will be the judge for Sir and Sister Rui." Li Yi patted her head gently and said, "What are you doing? You need a referee to make a bet. Sir, you even let Yongning be the referee when we made a bet." The Tsundra Lolita kept shaking her head, then said, "However, the referee can also participate in the bet." Li Yi said helplessly, Okay. You can be the judge if you want." Rui smiled as she watched her run out. She looked down at the swaddling clothes and said in a small voice, "Duaner has fallen asleep again." Li Yi took the little fellow from her arms and put him in the wooden crib. He turned back and said, "You've been holding him for 2 hours. You didn't sleep well last night. Let him sleep. You go rest for a while." Rui shook her head and said, "It's okay. I am not tired. I will stay here and guard him. If he wakes up, there are maids watching here. They will call you when he wakes up." "It's okay." Li Yi shook his head and strode over. He carried her in his arms and walked out of the door. The 2 maids at the door lowered their heads. Rui blushed and whispered, "Husband, there are so many people watching." "So what if there are so many people watching? Can't I hold my own wife?" Li Yi shook his head and kicked open the door of the room next door. He put her on the bed and took off her shoes and coat. Finally, he covered her with a quilt. Li Yi looked at her and whispered, "Sleep. He takes a long nap. He won't wake up for a while." Rui nodded slightly. Her eyelashes blinked a few times and she slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi gently closed the door and stood in the corridor, looking outside. It was the beginning of the 12th lunar month. It had snowed last night, but it was not thick. The old emperor's illness would relapse in winter. It was said that it had worsened these days and he had been bedridden for several days. It was close to the end of the year and the academy was closed. The old emperor was bedridden and needed to recuperate. He could not be disturbed. Yongning and Shaoning had been staying here these days and only went back at night. Although the old emperor could only live in the warm room, he only needed to endure for another month. If he continued to maintain this state of retirement in the spring of next year and did not receive any major stimulation, it should not be a big problem to continue living for another year and a half. However, with his physical condition, he should not be able to participate in this year's court meeting. But with Her Royal Highness, it did not matter whether he participated or not. Speaking of Her Royal Highness, Li Yi realized that he had not seen her for a while. The end of the year was approaching. There must be a lot of things to do in the court. The court meeting in half a month's time needed to start preparing now. He thought for a moment and turned his head. He ordered a servant in the corridor, "Prepare the carriage. Let's go to the palace." In front of the Li residence, the carriage slowly moved. After a full quarter of an hour, a small figure slipped into a room. The proud Lolita looked at the sleeping child in the stroller and whispered in a voice that only she could hear, "Duaner, you have to call Xiaonyang first." Outside the Li residence, a carriage came from a distance and finally stopped. Inside the carriage, Xiao Chui clenched her fists. She turned her head and asked worriedly, "Miss, are we really going in? How about we tell Li first?" "No need, we are not here to see him." Zheng Zumo shook her head. She grabbed the hem of her clothes with both hands. After loosening her lips, she nodded and said, "Get off the carriage." Inside the residence, a door opened. Rui walked out from inside and asked Xiao Huan, who had just walked in from outside, "Did the son-in-law go out?" The servant girl nodded and said, "He has been out for a while. It seems that he went to the palace." She was relieved. If he saw that she did not sleep obediently, she would be scolded again. Just as she was about to check on the child, a servant hurried over. "Madam, there is a Miss Zhang outside visiting." "Ah." The servant girl heard this and immediately widened her eyes. Rui was startled. After a moment of absent-mindedness, she immediately said, Quickly go and invite the girl in. After that, she shook her head again. Forget it, I will go myself. Chapter 828. Given official Dong's abilities and talents, it is a waste of talent to only be the governor of the capital. Emingzu put down a memorial and stood up. I have talked to father. We plan to transfer him to the Hall of Governmental Affairs after the new year. According to father, it seems that he wants official Dong to take over Prime Minister Shen's position. The governor of the capital, Dong Wen-yun. Li Yi had known him since he was at Qing and Fu. Of course, at that time, he did not know that he was Prime Minister Shen's son-in-law. It sounded normal for a son-in-law to take over his father-in-law's position, but the Shen family still had a high-ranking official in court. Who knew if the brother-in-law and brother-in-law would fight over the position of Prime Minister? Of course, this was the Shen family's business. He did not worry about it. Speaking of this matter, Li Yi looked at her and asked, the position of the capital governor is very important. After official Dong is transferred, who do you plan on letting take over? Emingzu casually picked up a memorial from the table and said, this is the candidate submitted by the Minister of Governmental Affairs. Actually, the most suitable person for this position is the governor of the capital, Lu Daiyou. He is suitable to be a parent official, but he can only be a parent official. After reaching the position of capital governor, there is no need to go any higher. Going lower would be a waste of talent. Emingzu said and then shook her head. However, his qualifications are still shallow. If we forcefully promote him, it will inevitably cause criticism. We can only wait until later to consider it. The Cui family, the Qin family, the Han family. Li Yi looked at the memorial and said, they really know how to pick people. It looks like they are determined to get this position. He had heard Chen Chong mention that the Cui family was determined to get the position of capital governor. Among these nominees, almost all of them were officials in the King of Shu's faction. No matter how they chose, they could not avoid it. Emingzu walked over and said slowly, Assistant Minister of Revenue, Zhang Shichen. This person is very capable. If we really had to choose from these people, only he can take on this heavy responsibility. Not to mention that she was only a temporary representative of the court. Even a real emperor would have to ask his subordinates to select some important officials before choosing one of them. If they ignored the opinions of the officials and stubbornly acted on their own, the court would be in chaos. Of course, she was different from her father. Her father could make an exception to promote someone, but she did not have the right to do so. Although Zhang Shichen's name was at the end of the list, after some consideration, she still felt that if she had to choose one of these people, Zhang Shichen was the most suitable one. It doesn't make sense to be promoted from the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue to the capital governor. Li Yi shook his head. In order to make up the numbers, the King of Shu's faction was really willing to report anyone and everyone. Zhang Shichen was in the Ministry of Revenue, and he was likely to take over the position of Minister of Revenue in the future. Wasn't that much better than being the capital governor? Although Minister Qin was in the prime, Zhang minister's position, it was a lot. Governor's position, Zhang Tsang was of minister. Li Yi continued, moreover, although Zhang Shichen is capable, he is too lazy. He leaves early every day. How can he be a qualified governor? Old Zhang was different from the Qin and Cui families. This was a muddy water. In order to prevent trouble in the future, it was better to let him be the assistant minister of revenue. Emingzu looked at him in surprise. Do you really have a prejudice against Zhang Shichen? It is just a matter of fact. Li Yi shook his head. Even if Zhang Shichen was here, I would still dare to say this. Your Highness, Assistant Minister Zhang has entered the palace to report. He is waiting outside. A eunuch walked in and bowed. Emingzu looked at Li Yi and said, let him in. Zhang Shichen must have just returned to the capital. He had not gone home to change and looked travel-worn. He handed over a memorial with both hands and said, your subject has been ordered to supervise the taxation of the Beijing-Hebei region. This is the detailed report. Your Highness, please have a look. When the eunuch took the booklet and handed it over, he raised his head and looked at Li Yi vaguely, then stood still on the spot. Emingzu looked through it carefully and nodded. Very good. You have worked hard. This is my duty. Zhang Shichen bowed again. Your Highness, if there is nothing else, I will take my leave. After Zhang Shichen left, Emingzu came over with a list and asked, "Then who do you think should take this position?" Li Yi looked around and thought for a moment. He said, "Let's do as you say." Among these people, Zhang Shichen's status was special. Those on the King of Shu's side would definitely not think that the eldest princess would push the current Assistant Minister of Revenue to the position of capital governor. Thus, he was purely here to fill in the numbers. In this way, their arrangements and plans could be disrupted. It would also be beneficial for their future actions. After all, Lord Song was a good opponent that could only be found by chance. Thinking of the things that Chen Chong had mentioned, he casually asked, "Oh yes, there's one more thing. Are you familiar with great scholar Chu?" Emingzu suddenly raised her head and looked at him. She said in surprise, "Grand Tutor Chu?" Li Yi shook his head. "What Grand Tutor? I don't know." Chen Chong said he was some one Shin of the Jing Kingdom. Emingzu looked at him nervously and asked, "Grand Tutor Chu has just returned to the capital. What's wrong? You met him? Did you have any conflicts?" "I've only heard of him once. I haven't even met him. How can there be any conflicts?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise. "Do I look like someone who gets into conflicts so easily?" Grand Tutor Chu was once Imperial Father's teacher. Even Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen have received his teachings. He was once in charge of the Imperial College and the Hongwen Library. All of the nobles in the capital and nearly half of the officials in the court can be considered his students. Grand Tutor Chu is someone that all the scholars in the world look up to. Emingzu looked at him and said seriously, "If you meet him, you'd better be respectful. If something really happens, even Imperial Father won't be able to protect you." "Don't worry. Why would I provoke him? I'm worried that he'll blackmail me." Li Yi shook his head and waved his hand in farewell. "Continue with your work. I'm leaving. Remember, the Chu family is not to be provoked," Emingzu reminded him worriedly. Li Yi waved his hand casually. "I know. I won't provoke them for no reason." When he walked out, he was still a little confused and depressed. Why hadn't he heard of this Grand Tutor Chu before? According to Her Royal Highness, this old man had extremely high prestige and influence in both the court and the court. Her Royal Highness might not be able to compare with him. If such a person was recruited by the King of Shu, wouldn't their previous efforts be in vain? When Li Yi walked out of the palace gate, Zhang Shichen's figure was still walking slowly in front of him. Hearing the voice behind him, Zhang Shichen turned around and cupped his hands. "I have to thank County Marquis Li." Li Yi asked in surprise, "Why are you thanking me?" Zhang Shichen looked at him and said, "If it weren't for County Marquis Li, I wouldn't have to run around these days. I would have a more relaxed life." "You're welcome. It's what I should do." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "A pillar of the country like Lord Song should work hard for the country. Her Royal Highness just said that Lord Song is outstanding and does a good job. It's reasonable for you to work hard." Zhang Shichen raised his eyebrows. "County Marquis Li, you must put in a good word for me in front of Her Royal Highness, right?" "Of course." Li Yi nodded and then waved his hand. "It's what I should do. Lord Song, you don't have to thank me." The two walked side by side. After walking out of the palace gate, Li Yi turned around and asked, "Last time in the tea house, I heard Lord Sung talk about the Eastern Palace, but I haven't asked for your opinion yet." Zhang Shichen looked at him, his eyes focused, and then he smiled and said, "I think that Lord Li is right. This is a matter of the royal family, and it should be decided by His Majesty alone. We, the foreign officials, should not worry about it." Li Yi nodded, looked at him and said solemnly, "I'm afraid Lord Sung should be prepared to take on more important tasks." Zhang Shichen was stunned and a trace of doubt appeared on his face. "What do you mean, County Marquis Li?" Li Yi waved his hand and turned to leave. "You'll know in the future." Chapter 829. Outside the door, the two maids clenched their fists tightly. They looked at each other and then pressed their ears to the door. Both of them had the urge to rush in if something went wrong. The atmosphere inside the room was much more harmonious. Zheng Zumo looked at the child in the swaddling clothes and smiled. "This child really looks like Madame Li." Rui still had a smile on her face. She looked down and said, "He looks more like my husband." Zheng Zumo looked down and saw the little fellow in her arms looking around. She said, "His eyes are like Madame Li's and his nose is like his." Rui looked at her and suddenly reached out and asked, "Would you like to hold him?" Zheng Zumo was startled and then said in disbelief, "Can I?" "Of course." Rui handed the swaddling clothes over with a smile. Zheng Zumo carefully took it. The little fellow stared at her and then raised his hand with difficulty to touch the butterfly embroidered on her chest. Rui said with some surprise, "This child is usually shy with strangers. When he was hugged by strangers, he would cry incessantly. It is strange today. He is not shy at all when he sees you." Zheng Zumo played with the little fellow's fingers with a smile and said, "Maybe I'm more popular with children. When I was in the Jade Courtyard, one of my sisters gave birth without telling her mother. She cried when everyone held her, She only finished half of her sentence and her voice gradually faded. At the same time, she lowered her head and carefully handed over the swaddling clothes. When she raised her head, a smile returned to her face. "Okay, it is getting late. It is time for us to go back." Rui stood up and said, "I will see you out." "No need, no need." Zheng Zumo waved her hand and said, "I will go out by myself. Madam. Rest. Xiaofan, come and look after Dwainer. I will go out for a while," Rui said to the door. Then, she looked at Zheng Zumo and smiled. "My body has been fine for a long time. Let's go." Son-in-law left in such a hurry this time. With his hands behind his back, Feng strolled to the entrance of the mansion. When he saw a familiar figure, he waved his hand out of habit. "What a coincidence, Miss Zheng. Come out, son-in-law is inside." After he said that, he was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and saw the words, "Li Residence." His eyes widened. When he looked over again, he realized that there was more than one familiar figure. Miss Zheng, eldest miss. Just as he opened his mouth, he slapped himself on the mouth and hurriedly corrected himself. "Eldest miss, Miss Zheng, what a coincidence, both of you are going out." Rui looked at him and said in surprise, "Uncle Feng, I today's son." Feng raised his head and looked at the winter sky that was filled with gray clouds. He muttered, "How did it disappear?" Su. When Li Yi lifted the curtain for the third time, he saw that the sloppy old man still had his eyes closed. Rui looked up at him and said seriously, "So you don't believe me?" Li Yi opened his mouth to say a word and found that it was a single-choice question. For such a young child, unless he was a monster, it was naturally impossible for him to produce such a difficult syllable. Li Yi could still tell if his child was a monster or not. But could he doubt Rui's words? Obviously not. However, the truth was the truth. It couldn't be shifted or changed by anyone's will. The truth might be late, but it would never be absent. This was what he taught Lu Yi. On one side was the truth, and on the other side was Rui. This was a multiple-choice question. It couldn't be simpler. Li Yi nodded and said with some regret, "In that case, I really lost." He sighed in his heart. Sisters were sisters after all. It turned out that Mississippi Lu was not the only one who knew this trick. Rui smiled and said, "Then do you remember that I can make a request of you?" "Of course. Your husband is a man of his word. Even if you want the stars in the sky, I will ask Feng to take them down." Rui almost never asked him for anything. Naturally, he wouldn't refuse her request. Feng probably wouldn't refuse it either. Then, Rui stood up and held his hand. She looked into his eyes and said seriously, "Husband, let Miss Zheng marry us." Chapter 830. Li Yi had to admit that after Rui said this, his heart skipped a beat. More than a beat. "I said, let Sister Zheng marry into our family." Rui looked at him and repeated. Li Yi suddenly didn't know where to put his hands. It didn't seem right to put them outside. It didn't seem right to put them in his sleeves. It didn't seem right either. Put them in his pockets. There were no pockets. Rui took his hand and sat down by the bed. She said, "Sister Zheng came just now." Only then did Li Yi remember the carriage he saw at the gate of the mansion just now. His heart tightened again, and he asked casually, "What did you talk about?" "Just chatting casually. She came to see me and Dwainer, and she even brought the little shoes she made herself. Miss Zheng's needlework is better than mine. Dwainer also likes her very much. Rui smiled and looked at Li Yi. Sister Zheng is really good. I can see that she likes husband as much as I do. Li Yi looked at her. This kind of joke, others might make, but Rui would never make it, let alone a second time. Wife. Li Yi opened his mouth, but was interrupted by her. Rui held his hand with a smile on her face. She asked, "Does husband like Sister Zheng?" Yes. Li Yi nodded. This was the only answer he could make at this moment. I'm sorry, Sister Zheng. Rui looked at him, suddenly lowered her head and said, I once went to find her without telling husband. Li Yi looked at her in a daze. Neither Rui nor Zuemo had mentioned this to him. Rui said in a low voice, I asked her if she liked husband. If she liked him, she might as well marry into the Li family. When? Just a few days before husband left the capital. What did she say? She refused. Li Yi clenched his other fist. It wasn't hard to imagine the situation and state of mind they were in at that time. No wonder she had been avoiding him for those days. And for Rui to personally go to Willow Lane and say these words to her, what kind of determination did she have? Rui held his hand tightly and said in a low voice, Husband, I'm sorry. At that time, I only thought that if she could marry into the Li family, she might be able to give birth to a child for you and the Li family. I was too selfish. Li Yi let out a sigh of relief, shook his head and said, I'm the one who should say sorry. Don't say that, husband. Rui leaned on his shoulder and said, My husband is very good to me. I know that my husband cares about my feelings, so I can only let Miss Zheng suffer. Li Yi put his arm around her waist and lowered his head to ask, Now that we have Dwainer, why do you still let? Because little sister Zheng is really good. Rui lowered her head and murmured, Not to mention husband, even I am starting to like her. She suddenly raised her head and asked curiously, How did husband and Miss Zheng first meet? How did they meet? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, I think I just came here. Not long after I was caught by Rui and brought to the village. One time, I went down the mountain and was brought to the jadeite courtyard by Li Xian. You know how Li Xian is. He's a playboy by nature and always goes to these brothels. I didn't want to go but he dragged me. That day at the jadeite courtyard, I happened to see her performing. I mistook her for someone else and thought she was an old acquaintance. I lost my composure and interrupted her performance and was called a lecher. Old acquaintance? Rui looked up at him and asked, An old acquaintance who could make you lose your composure must be very important to you. Where is she now? How is she doing? Li Yi was a little absent-minded and then said, It's been a long time. Now that I think about it, it seems like it happened in my previous life. As for her, I will never see her again. It was a misunderstanding, and at this time, he could only explain it to Rui in this way. Rui lowered her head and said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned it. It's okay. Li Yi helped her smooth the hair in front of her forehead and continued, Speaking of it, it's not the first time. The first time was when I took her painting by mistake. The painting that husband hid in the study? Yes, that's the one. Li Yi was stunned and then continued. Later on at the jadeite courtyard, of course, I was brought there by Li Xian and accidentally broke into her room. At that time she had just come out of the shower and then, if there's such a thing, then husband. It was a misunderstanding. That was a pure misunderstanding. Li Yi shook his head repeatedly. Later on, I accidentally saw her changing clothes. I didn't see anything that time. It was also a misunderstanding. Did you see anything that time? No, that day. Later we moved to the capital. When we left, I wrote a few poems for her to compete for the title of courtesan belle, but I didn't know that she had long wanted to redeem herself. Once she became the courtesan belle, her value would increase greatly. She couldn't redeem herself and almost made things worse. There were more than a dozen of them. More than a dozen? Maybe I remembered it wrong. Later on, she came to the capital and helped in the brothel, and then helped in the clothing store. For a period of time, some people in the capital targeted me, which affected her a lot. She was almost wronged and imprisoned. Rui blinked and asked, Then you fell in love with her after a long time? No. Li Yi shook his head and said, It hasn't reached that stage yet. Then, has it reached that stage yet? Except for those few accidents, they actually didn't even hold hands. Li Yi shook his head and frankly told the truth. Husband, you can make the decision on this matter. Rui lowered her head and held his hand tightly. She bit her lower lip and said slowly, "That's all I can do." Li Yi didn't say anything. He just held her tightly with his other arm. After that, there was no sound coming from the room. When the little fellow woke up, Rui went to coax her. He played with her for a while. When he stepped out of the room, he heard the voice behind him again. "Husband, I have a question." Rui's voice was soft. "If I and Sister Zheng fell into the water at the same time, who would you save first?" Bang! When Li Yi stepped out of the door, he tripped heavily and flew straight down the corridor. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and only fell awkwardly when he landed. He was not as miserable as Chen Zhongzhong. Feng stood in the courtyard and looked at this scene in a daze. Then he walked over and sighed, saying, "Young master, think about it. There are no obstacles in life that can't be overcome." Li Yi tidied up his clothes and looked at him in surprise. He asked, "What are you talking about?" Feng patted him on the shoulder, sighed again and said, "Eldest miss will beat and scold you. Just bear with it and it will be over. Don't fight back, or you will be beaten even worse." Li Yi frowned and looked at him. "What are you trying to say?" Feng had a puzzled expression on his face and asked, "You've been inside for so long. Didn't eldest miss say anything?" "She did," Li Yi looked at him and said, "Rui asked me to marry Zumo." Strange. Looking at Feng, who was suddenly stunned, Li Yi shook his head and turned to leave. Marry her?" Old Feng turned around and stared blankly at the disappearing figure before he shook his head in disbelief. "There's no justice." Chapter 831. "Li Li, you've come." When Li Yi walked into the small courtyard in Willow Lane, Xiao Cui lowered her head and spoke. She looked listless. Li Yi looked at her and asked in confusion, "What's wrong, are you not feeling well?" "I'm fine." Xiao Cui looked at him and opened her mouth. In the end, she still shook her head mechanically. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Do you have something to say to me?" "Miss doesn't allow me to say it." Xiao Cui lowered her head and said, then quickly ran away. Li Yi stood where he was and shook his head. He roughly knew what she wanted to say. Crossing the courtyard, he saw that the door to the art studio was open and walked in. That familiar figure was painting inside. More accurately, she was designing clothes. These things had originally been done by a few people, but in a certain aspect, she was actually quite similar to Wan Ruoqing. They were the kind of people who could not stay idle. There was a stove in the room, but if one's hand was left outside for a long time, it would still be a little cold. When Li Yi walked in, she put down her brush and put her two hands by her mouth to breathe. When she saw Li Yi walk in, a trace of panic appeared on her face. Li Yi walked over and wrapped her hands in his. He said, "It's such a cold day. Don't paint anymore. If your hands get frozen, it won't be easy in the future." Being held by him like this, it was very warm and also very comforting. She struggled a few times but could not break free, so she did not resist anymore. She lowered her head and said in a small voice, "I went to your house today. I didn't tell you in advance. I'm sorry. I just thought I should go and see. I didn't think." "I know." Li Yi nodded and said, "Rui told me everything." She raised her head slightly and said, I didn't want to cause you any trouble." "I know." Li Yi nodded and asked, "At that time before I went to the Qi Kingdom, did Rui come to look for you?" Zheng Zumo's body trembled imperceptibly. She then nodded and said, "She came here once. She's your wife and asked about the shop. Mrs. Li is very nice." "That's all?" She nodded and said, "That's all." "She told me that too." Li Yi let go of her hand, took a deep breath, held her in his arms and whispered, "I'm sorry, that sentence should have been said by me." The delicate body in his arms trembled. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her face was full of smiles. "It's nothing, don't blame her. Anyway, I didn't take it seriously. It's nothing, really nothing. Last time doesn't count." Li Yi let go of her, held her shoulders, and looked into her eyes. She hurriedly wiped her face and lowered her head. "Now I'll ask again." Li Yi looked at her and asked, Are you willing to marry into the Li family? Although her heart was beating wildly, she still raised her head, sniffed and said, "No." "If you don't want to, then I'll ask again." Li Yi held her face and asked again. "Miss Zheng, are you willing to marry into the Li family?" "No." "Luo Shui goddess, are you willing to marry into the Li family?" "No." "Nan Nan, are you willing to marry into the Li family?" "Yes." Xiao Chui stood at the door, clenched her fists and said anxiously, "Miss, say you are willing." Xiao Chui was slapped on the butt and left. Zheng Zumo sat on the bed, shook her head and said, "I'm fine here. Why would I go to the Li family? Do you want to raise me like a canary? Besides, if I leave, what about Sister Ruoqing? If we leave, she and Xiao Zhu will be the only ones left here." In fact, Li Yi had already thought about this problem before he came. This matter still depended on her choice. For now, this method should be the most suitable. One step at a time. She had already experienced too many setbacks and tribulations to reach this step. She must not be impatient. Xiao Chui poked her head out from the door and said, Li, miss, I know how to solve this matter." Li Yi glanced over there and said, "Xiao Chui, close the door. Don't eavesdrop." The little maid pursed her lips and closed the door in a sullen mood. Zheng Zumo looked at him and suddenly said, "In 2 days, I want you to accompany me to the Zheng family." Li Yi frowned. "Why are we going to the Zheng family?" "Never mind." Zheng Zumo shook her head again and said, "Let's wait for a few days." "No need to wait. We'll go in 2 days." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Since it is Nanan's matter, even if it is a mountain of swords and a sea of flames, I have to go. Even if the Zheng family is a dragon's den, I have to go." "Don't be serious." Zheng Zumo rolled her eyes at him and said, "What mountain of swords and sea of flames? I just want to take over my parents' memorial tablets. Last time, I went with Sister Ruoqing." She stopped abruptly at this point. Li Yi frowned and asked, "You two went before. Didn't the Zheng family give it to you?" Zheng Zumo nodded and said, "That was at the beginning of the year." Li Yi patted her hand and said, "Don't worry, Master Zheng is a sensible person. He will give it to you." "Not because of him." Zheng Zumo shook her head and said, "Let's talk about this in a few days." Li Yi nodded and thought of something. He suddenly asked, "Let me ask you a question. If Master Zheng and I fell into the water at the same time and you could only save one, who would you save?" Zheng Zumo shook her head and said, "I don't know how to swim, so..." She thought for a moment and seemed to have thought of something. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "If it was me and Madame Li who fell into the water, who would you save?" Li Yi's expression froze. "Don't talk too much, don't talk too much. The more you talk, the more mistakes you make." This was an unchanging truth. Seeing the eyes of the Luo Shui goddess, Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Don't worry, Rui will save you. Her martial arts are very high and she can fly by stepping on water. She said this morning that she likes you, so she won't leave you in the lurch." In the carriage, old Feng couldn't help but ask, "Son-in-law, was what you said this morning true?" Old Feng couldn't help but feel puzzled. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, "What is it? Do you have any thoughts?" No. Feng shook his head and said, "What thoughts can I have?" They didn't speak along the way. When Feng returned home and sat at the table, he saw his wife coming out of the kitchen with a tray. He shook his head and sighed. "I already said that our family doesn't lack money. We can just hire a few maids to do the cooking and cleaning." The reason for hiring maids wasn't just to clean. They had been eating plain food for decades, even if they had to change it every 2 days. So what if you have money? You can do whatever you want just because you have money. You might have forgotten the hard times you had in the past, but I haven't. You even hired maids. Mrs. Feng reprimanded him a few times. Then, as if she had thought of something, her brows immediately furrowed. "Hired maids? You even hired a few? Tell me, did you have some devious thoughts again?" "Okay, no more. Seeing that his wife was about to lose her temper again, Feng quickly changed the topic and asked, "What do you want to eat today?" Feng's wife glared at him and said, "Wild vegetable porridge." Feng's face immediately turned bitter. "Ah, wild vegetable porridge again. What's wrong with wild vegetable porridge? I specially went outside the city to pick these wild vegetables to let you know that the hard days before have only passed a few years ago. But didn't I just eat it the day before yesterday? Feng's face was bitter. He said, I've eaten it all my life. Can't I change it to something else? For example, the white fungus and lotus seed porridge I had a few days ago. That's the leftover wild vegetables from the day before yesterday. Wait. If you don't want to eat it after eating it all your life, then I've been with you all my life. Are you tired of it? Feng's wife put down the bowl and chopsticks, picked up a broom and pointed at him. Tell me, who made the white fungus and lotus seed porridge for you? Do you have someone outside? Well, I've long heard that when you were outside, you always went to the jade courtyard. Do you have someone outside? Feng's face turned red. He pointed at her and stammered. You're slandering me. I'm slandering you. Tell me, who made the white fungus and lotus seed porridge for you? Can't you learn more from Miss Feng? Well, you've grown up. You even mentioned Miss Feng. If you don't tell me the truth today, you won't be able to live on. After a while, the man who ran out of the house alone stood on the street, rubbed his butt that was hit by the broom, sighed deeply and said to the sky, There's no justice. Chapter 832. As the end of the year approached, the festive atmosphere in the capital grew stronger. In the Li Manor, the festive atmosphere had not dissipated since the birth of the young master. Today, the manor was especially lively. Li Xian's heir's wife brought the little princess to visit. Rui did not have many friends in Jingdo, so the heir's wife was one of the few people she could talk to. Furthermore, she was pregnant at the same time, and the two children were born only a few hours apart. Imperceptibly, there was an additional layer of intimacy between them. The two of them were talking in the room. The two children were hugged by their respective mothers. They looked at each other and stared at each other. In another hall, Li Xian was not convinced and said, Why not? You have to give me a reason, right? I said no means no. You don't have to experiment. This method won't work. Just give up. Li Yi waved his hand and said without hesitation. On the road of science, he was still standing at the crossroads. He wanted to use two pools, one high and one low, to create a device that would never stop moving and solve the problem of getting water in arid areas. Even if he became the emperor and could change the laws of the Jing kingdom, he could not change the law of conservation of energy, not to mention that he was only a small crown prince. Li Xian said firmly, I still think this method is feasible. Brother Shen and I have the same idea. Just wait and see. You'll know when the time comes. Li Yi shook his head and said, There's no need to go through so much trouble. You might as well find a donkey and hang a handful of fresh grass next to its mouth. It won't be able to eat it no matter what. This way it will keep walking forward. You can put that thing on the donkey and let it run in circles. That way, it can pump water from a low place to a high place. Li Xian's face showed a thoughtful expression. His eyes grew brighter and brighter. At a certain moment he suddenly slapped his thigh and said, Why didn't I think of this method? Li Yi waved his hand and said, All right, you can go find your brother Shen and think about it. I have something to say to Mingzu. Li Xian shook his head, sat down and said, It's quite cold outside. You guys talk. I'll stay here and think. I won't disturb you. Li Yi looked at him without saying a word. Li Xian looked at him and finally thought of something. He stood up and nodded. I understand. It's not safe here. Tell me, I'll go out and keep a lookout for you. Therefore, it was very reliable to have such a friend. At critical times, he could betray them and keep a lookout. With such a friend, what more could he ask for? Li Yi sat down at the table and poured a cup of tea for the two of them. He asked, Are you sure you want Zhang Shichen to take over after Lord Dong is transferred? Li Mingzhu nodded and said, I'm confident in his ability to handle matters, but Li Yi knew what she was worried about. When it came to choosing officials, ability was important, but political stance was even more important. A person who was not outstanding but had a firm stance was definitely more worthy of consideration than a person who was outstanding but had a wrong political stance. Li Yi shook his head and said, Don't worry about this. Lord Zhang is a smart man. He knows what choice to make. He had already tested Zhang Shichen several times. For such a person, some things didn't need to be said clearly. A look or a casual word could reach some kind of tacit understanding. Taking 10,000 steps back, since Zhang Shichen could help him sit in this position, he could also ask him to step down. As for the specifics, he would have to wait and see. Oh yes, the Spring Festival is approaching. The Grand Court Conference is coming soon. In another half a month, it will be the Lantern Festival again. A few days ago, the Chui family united with the officials to petition for the King of Shu to be transferred back. What did His Majesty say? Thinking of another matter, Li Yi turned to look at her and asked. Falsification, creating momentum among the people, inciting public opinion. Mingzu shook her head and said, what he did was no different from rebellion. How could father forgive him so easily? He had already ordered the 2 prime ministers that if they encountered such a petition again, they would directly strike it down. All of His Majesty's children are smarter than the other. How could the King of Shu? A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. He asked with some surprise, do you think there is a possibility? Mingzu covered his mouth and said with a frown, is this something we can talk about? Li Yi moved her hand away and said innocently, I just want to ask if the King of Shu had a fever when he was young and damaged his brain. Speaking of the King of Shu. A trace of doubt appeared on Mingzhu's face. Even though he is usually a little reckless, it is impossible for him to be so reckless and choose such an opportunity. She looked at Li Yi with a burning gaze and asked, tell me honestly, was it you? We are familiar with each other, but if you talk nonsense like this, I can't do anything to you. He looked at her with a serious expression and said, your status is different now. You must remember to be careful with your words and actions. After reminding her, he stood up and walked out the door. Where are you going? You only have 1 day off. Rest well. I am going to talk to Li Xian about the donkey. The court had always been sensitive. Even the slightest movement would be magnified countless times, not to mention that the capital governor, Dong Wen-yun, was about to be transferred to the Secretariat to take up an important position. The position of the capital governor might be taken over by the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Zhang Shichen. Although it was said to be taking over, it was actually not just taking over. Because there was no news from the court about who would take over the position of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. This meant that Zhang Shichen was not only the capital governor but also the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. The meaning of this was completely different. The Chui family. The head of the Chui family had a face full of doubt. He paced in the hall and murmured, how could it be Lord Sung? This time, they had indeed used a lot of power and even paid a lot of price to determine the list of candidates for the position of the capital governor. It was to ensure that this position did not fall into the hands of others. However, among them, there were not many who were qualified to take over this position. Helpless, they let Zhang Shichen take up the position. It was better than giving up the position to someone else and risking the risk of losing it to someone else. But no one expected that Zhang Shichen actually went up. Although they did not lose anything and allowed their own people to take the position as they wished, this was completely different from the plan. Even some of the follow-up arrangements were affected. A man stepped forward and said, Big brother, why worry? What difference does it make whether it is Lord Sang or Lord Qin who goes up? Even if it is different from what we expected, it is still a good thing, isn't it? That being said, I can't figure out the eldest princess's thoughts at all. Which of the others is not more suitable than Lord Sang? After saying this, he shook his head and said, You are right. No matter what, this is a good thing for us. Go and personally send the invitation. Tomorrow night, we will hold a banquet at the Drunken Moon Tower to congratulate Lord Sang. The middle-aged man nodded and said, Okay, I will go to the Zhang residence right away. Today, she had an appointment with Zumo to go to the Zhang residence to retrieve her parents' memorial tablets. Along the way, the closer she was to the Zhang residence, the slower her steps became. When she was about to reach the gate of the Zhang residence, she finally stopped and could not take another step. Li Yi turned around and found that she was staring at the gate of the Zhang residence with a very complicated look in her eyes. Don't worry, I am here. Li Yi held her hand and squeezed slightly, then strode in the direction of the gate. Chapter 833. Gentlemen, do you have a name card for me to hand in? The gatekeeper of the Zhang residence was very polite. He didn't look like he was going to let them in or announce their arrival. Today, there was a joyous occasion in the residence, and many important people had come. They couldn't just go and inform everyone that came. Only a good gatekeeper who could help the master choose when to meet and who not to meet, and when to meet was a good gatekeeper. The last gatekeeper had let someone in who shouldn't have been, and that was why he was kicked out by the madam. Li Yi held Zhang Zimo's hand and said calmly, "You just have to go in and tell Master Zhang that an old friend from Willow Alley is here to visit." He already knew about the changes that had happened to the Zhang family over the past decade, but he was still not very clear about the inside story. Zimo didn't want to admit that she was a member of the Zhang family and didn't want to call Zhang Shichen second uncle. She must have her reasons, so he naturally had to let her be. The gatekeeper smiled and said, "Gentlemen, I'm really sorry, but my master is busy today. Why don't you come another day?" No name card meant that they weren't important people. The two were so young, and they didn't even say who they were. They only said they were old friends. Old friends. It was obvious that they had heard that their master had been promoted and wanted to use connections. If it was any other day, he would still go in to inform them just in case. But today was different. If he dampened the mood of the guests, he couldn't afford to be responsible as a lowly gatekeeper. Li Yi didn't come today to reason with the Zhang family, and there was no reason to. The Zhang family wouldn't give him what he wanted, and he had to get it. Under such circumstances, he had to rely on other means to solve the problem. Li Yi looked at the sloppy old man standing not far behind the two. The sloppy old man covered one side of his face and walked over with a slightly gloomy expression. His gloomy expression wasn't because he was being ordered around by Li Yi, but because one of his teeth was broken and half of his face was swollen. Naturally, it caused some emotional fluctuations. Is Miss back?" The sloppy old man didn't walk over, but an old voice suddenly came from inside the door. The voice was trembling and excited. When the gatekeeper saw him, he immediately bowed and said respectfully, "Housekeeper Ho." The old man called Steward Ho ignored him and quickly walked over. He looked at Zhang Zimo excitedly and said with a trembling voice, 13 years and 9 months. "Miss, you're finally back." Zhang Zimo looked at him and sighed after a long time. "Uncle Ho. Congratulations on your promotion, Lord Zhang. With Lord Zhang's ability, your future career will definitely be smoother. This official will first propose a toast to Lord Zhang." "What are you talking about, Lord Lu? These are all groundless rumors." Zhang Shichen clinked glasses with an official he was familiar with, and another voice came from the other side. "This is not groundless speculation. Lord Zhang's appointment letter has already been seen by someone. I reckon that the court will begin after the Lantern Festival at the latest. The earliest it will be announced will be during the Grand Court Conference. Come, let me also propose a toast to Lord Zhang." After Zhang Shichen clinked glasses again, his body began to sway. Today, with these people coming to the residence, he had already drunk quite a bit. Normally, his tolerance for alcohol was only average, but at this moment, he was almost at his limit. A woman dressed in luxurious clothing walked in from outside the door and held his arm. She turned her head and said apologetically, "Sirs, I am truly sorry. Lord Chui is hosting a banquet at Drunken Moon Pavilion tonight. Lord Qin and Lord Chen will also be there. At that time, there will be some matters to discuss. My master really cannot drink anymore. Since this is the case, let's quickly let Lord Sung rest. If something important is ruined, we cannot afford to bear the consequences. Yes, let's quickly let Lord Sung rest." These people also knew what the surnames Chui, Qin, and Chen represented, so they did not stop her. "This woman will not disturb the sirs." The woman looked at the two servant girls beside her and said, "Hurry and help the master to rest." "Yes." As soon as the woman walked out of the hall, a figure hurried over and whispered something in her ear. Hearing this, the woman's brows instantly furrowed. Didn't she already deny being a member of the Zhang family? Why is she causing trouble at this time? A trace of disgust appeared on her face as she said, "The master is already resting. Let's leave her for a while first. When the time comes, find a random reason to send her away." The servant immediately bowed and said yes. Just a jinx. Does she really think she is still the young mistress of the Zhang family? The woman murmured and left with a sullen expression. "Ever since I can remember, Uncle Ho has been taking care of all the chores in the family. Uncle Ho treated me very well back then." While the two were waiting in a side hall, Zhang Zimo looked at the old man standing at the door and whispered. The old man looked around and finally walked in with a smile on his face. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Miss, this gentleman is? I am her husband." Li Yi held her hand and looked at the old man with a smile. "Zumo is indebted to Uncle Ho for taking care of me when I was young." Zheng Zumo blushed but didn't resist. She held his hand even tighter. The old man was startled when he heard this. He looked him up and down a few times before a smile appeared on his old face again. He said, "So it's the son-in-law. You're really a talented man. You're a perfect match for Miss." He looked at Li Yi for a while before a servant came in and said, "The master is drunk and is resting in his room. If you want to see the master, wait for him to wake up or come back tomorrow." "Drunk?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "It seems that Lord Sung is really in high spirits. He's not at the Ministry of Revenue's yamen at this time, but is actually drinking and having fun at home. He hasn't even become the capital governor yet." The servant was startled and then said angrily, "What did you say? All right, you can leave." Steward Ho waved his hand at him. The servant wanted to say something but could only swallow his anger and leave after being glared at by the steward. Steward Ho finally looked at Li Yi and said in a small voice, "Son-in-law, this is the Zhang residence. Be careful with your words, careful with your words." "Careful with what words? Where is Zhang Shichen? I would like to ask, is this how he usually serves the court as an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue?" Zheng Zumo pulled on Li Yi's sleeve as soon as he took a step forward. She looked at him and shook her head, then turned to Steward Ho and asked, "Uncle Ho, can we take a walk around the residence?" The old man nodded. "This is the Zhang residence. Of course you can. However, the residence has changed greatly. Let me lead the young mistress and son-in-law." A quarter of an hour later, in front of a courtyard in the Zhang residence. Zheng Zumo stood in front of the courtyard door for a long time before asking, "Uncle Ho, can we go in?" Apart from the maids and servants who clean regularly, the master usually does not allow anyone to enter. The old man hesitated for a moment before saying, "But since it is the young mistress, I believe that even if the master knew, he would not blame you." "Thank you, Uncle Ho." Zheng Zumo smiled faintly at the old man. She reached out her hand, and the courtyard door creaked open. Li Yi followed her inside. No matter how he looked at it, this was just an ordinary courtyard with nothing out of the ordinary. There was a stone table and chairs in the courtyard, and a swing hanging from a tree on the left side of the wall. The table and chairs were spotless. She walked over and touched them with her hand, surveying her surroundings. Finally, she walked under the swing. "This is where father, mother, and I used to live." She sat on the swing and said, "There's also this swing. My father tied it up for me. One time, I swung too high and fell from it. My father put the swing away. I begged him for a long time before he agreed. But this swing is no longer the same as the one from before. And here there's half a tile missing, but it's still the same. Look here, this is the name I carved on the tree when I was young. Unfortunately, it's been a long time, and I can't see it clearly anymore. Here, this brick can actually be taken down. When I was young, I hid things inside, and father and mother did not know." She really did take down the brick in the corner. Actually, it was only half a brick, so there was a small space inside. She took out a yellowed paper bag from inside. The paper bag was torn apart, and there was some black residue inside. The words, "Su-Ji Worldwide Commerce," could be faintly seen on the paper bag. She stood up, clapped her hands and murmured, "This place is exactly the same as before." Li Yi held her hand and asked, "Do you like it here?" She nodded slightly and said softly, "Coming here, I remembered many things from the past." "As long as you like it." Li Yi nodded, looked around and murmured, "As long as you like it." You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.